Around the year 1136, a Welsh priest named Geoffrey of Monmouth published a book called History of the Kings of Britain. This book is famous because it helped make King Arthur a popular figure in literature. Geoffrey's book tells many stories about Britain's legendary past, and in this video, we'll often quote from it. But for now, let's focus on Arthur and his father, Uther Pendragon. According to Geoffrey, Uther got the name Pendragon because of a strange and bright star that appeared in the sky. This star had a tail like fire, and at the end was a burning ball shaped like a dragon. From its mouth came two rays of light. One stretched over Gaul, and the other went over the Irish Sea and split into 7 smaller rays. Uther was worried and asked the wizard Merlin what it meant. Merlin explained, "This star and the fiery dragon represent you. The light over Gaul means you'll have a powerful son who will rule all the lands touched by that light. The other ray means you'll have a daughter whose children will become kings of Britain." When Uther became king, he remembered this prophecy. The name Pendragon actually means chief dragon. Not exactly what Geoffrey said, but it still sounds powerful and mysterious. So, is this just a legend? The famous historian Edward Gibbon, in his book The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, tells a story from the same time. In the 5th year of Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian, around September 542 AD, a deadly plague began in Egypt and reached Constantinople. It was called the Justinian Plague and killed up to 100 million people, destroying a quarter of the population in the eastern Mediterranean. Geoffrey's bright star sounds a lot like a comet that was actually seen in 539 AD, as Gibbon also mentions. We don't know if Geoffrey read about this in the writings of the Byzantine historian Procopius, but the star might have been a real event. That means the story of Uther and Arthur might have been inspired by something true. Of course, Geoffrey was not the first to mention King Arthur. Arthur's name appears earlier, around 830 AD, in a book called History of the Britons, often linked to a Welsh monk named Nennius. Arthur is mentioned twice, once for his 12 battles against the Saxons, and again in a list of wonders. Some of these battles happened in places we can't identify today, but a few are spread across Britain. The 7th battle happened in the Caledonian Forest, once located in the Scottish Highlands. The 9th battle took place in the City of the Legions, which could be Caerleon in Wales or Chester in England. The 12th battle, called Mons Badonicus, might have been near Oxfordshire or Wiltshire. The first wonder connected to Arthur happened in a place called Buelt. Nennius wrote, "There is a pile of stones with a stone on top. On it is the paw print of Arthur's dog, Cabal. The dog left the print while chasing a wild boar named Troint. Arthur later made the stone into a monument now called Carn Cabal." The second wonder is in Urching, where there is a spring and a grave of a boy named Amer, Arthur's son. Arthur killed him and buried him there. People say the size of the grave changes. It can be 6 feet, 9 feet, or even 15 feet long. These two stories show Arthur as both a great warrior and someone connected to magic or strange events. Other old Welsh texts written before Geoffrey, or not influenced by him, also talk about this early Arthur. One of the oldest mentions is in a poem called The Death of Cyndyllan, Marnad Cyndyllan, written shortly after 655 AD. It says that Cyndyllan and his brothers were like the children of a great Arthur. Another poem, the Gododin, written between 800 and 1000 AD, talks about a warrior named Gwydir who fought bravely and fed black ravens in battle, but says he was not Arthur, meaning even he wasn't as great. These poems show that Arthur was seen as a one-of-a-kind hero, but that's only part of his story. In the mysterious poem The Spoils of Annwn, linked to the bard Taliesin, maybe written before 800 AD, Arthur leads a group, including the poet, on a journey to Annwn, the Welsh otherworld. We don't know exactly what Arthur does, but the poem's sad refrain says, "Only 7 came back," suggesting many died in this otherworldly mission. We can see the different sides of King Arthur in a poem called Who is the Gatekeeper? Swing written sometime between 800 and 1000 AD. In this poem, Arthur is questioned by a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper wants to know who Arthur and his companions are before letting them in. Arthur introduces his followers, including Mabon, son of Modron, Manawyddan, son of Lleu, and Kai, better known as Sir Kay, Arthur's foster brother. Kai talks about a fight Arthur had with a witch at a place called Eifernach, where there was a lot of bloodshed. The poem also says Arthur fought strong warriors or dog-headed monsters in the hills of Iden. Arthur then praises Kai, saying he could drink from a horn meant for 4 men, killed 9 witches, went to Anglesey to defeat lions, but couldn't stop a monster called Palag's cat because his shield wasn't strong enough. The poem also talks about some real battles, but the overall feeling is that Arthur and Kai didn't just fight human enemies. They also battled magical creatures and witches. We see this even more clearly in the longest early story about Arthur, Kulhuch and Olwin. This story was written around the end of the 11th century, before Geoffrey of Monmouth's time. The main character is Kulhuch, whose name means pig run, because he was born in a pig pen. The story begins when Kulhuch's stepmother tells him he is meant to marry Olwin, the daughter of a giant named Ysbaddaden. Kulhuch falls in love with Olwin and goes to his cousin Arthur for help. Arthur's court is said to be in a forested place in Cornwall called Chellywig. Kulhuch goes there and asks for help. Arthur agrees and calls his warriors one by one. The story gives a long list of warriors. Some names seem serious, others are funny or strange, as if the writer was having fun. But some names are very important. Kai, Bedwyr, Sir Bedivere, Gwyn, son of Nudd, Arthur's wife Guinevere, and Lud Silverhand, who is connected to the Irish god Nuada, king of the magical people known as the Tuatha De Danann. These stories show that Arthur isn't just a historical king, he's also connected to gods, magical creatures, and ancient myths. He's a legendary and many-sided hero. Arthur sends some of his warriors, including Kai and Bedwyr, to help Kulhuch. Together they go on a quest to find the giant Ysbaddaden and his daughter Olwin. When they find them, Kulhuch asks to marry Olwin, but the giant refuses at first because a prophecy says he will die when his daughter gets married. After 3 days, he agrees, but only if Kulhuch can complete a long list of nearly impossible tasks. The first task is done quickly. Kai kills a giant named Gurnach and brings back his sword. Then they return to Arthur's court. The rest of the story describes some of the other tasks. One of the most important is the hunt for a giant wild boar named Turc Traith. But before they can begin the hunt, they must prepare. The hunt cannot happen without a special dog named Drudwyn, and only Mabon, son of Modron, can handle this dog. But Mabon has been missing since he was 3 days old, so Arthur's men go on a journey to find him. Kai and Gwair ask several very old animals for help: a starling, a stag, an owl, an eagle, and finally a salmon, the oldest of them all. The salmon tells them Mabon is a prisoner in Gloucester. Kai and Gwaihir report this to Arthur, who leads his warriors to attack Gloucester and rescue Mabon. Before the hunt for the boar begins, they complete another task. This one is very important, not just for Arthur's story, but also for Welsh and British mythology. Ysbaddaden wants a magic cauldron, big cooking pot, to cook meat at the wedding feast. The cauldron belongs to Durrington the Irishman, who works for Odgur, son of the Irish king. Arthur sends messengers, but Durrington refuses to give the cauldron. So Arthur sails to Ireland on his ship Prydwen, and there Bedwyr kills Durrington and takes the cauldron. This story shows not just Arthur's bravery, but also how deeply his tale connects with Welsh mythology. The big hunt for the wild boar Twrch likely comes from ancient Celtic myths. This event is also mentioned in the Historia Brittonum, written earlier. There, the boar is called Troint, and Arthur's dog Cabal is mentioned, just like in Kulhuch and Olwin. Interestingly, the word Cabal actually means horse. In this story, the hunt is shown as a huge and epic event. Arthur gathers warriors from the 3 islands of Britain, from France, Armorica, and Normandy. They all sail together to Ireland, where the wild boar and its 7 young are living. The battle lasted for a whole week. According to the story, Twrch was once a king, but because of his sins, he was turned into a wild boar. After some time, the fight moved from Ireland to Britain, because apparently, the huge boar could swim. Twrch killed many of Arthur's warriors, but Arthur and his men managed to kill many of the boar's young. In the end, Arthur achieved his goal. He took the comb, razor, and scissors that were between the boar's ears. However, the giant boar escaped alive and swam away into the deep sea near Cornwall. This part of the story is important not just as a heroic adventure, but also because it shows how Celtic beliefs were connected to magical creatures. In early Welsh sources, Arthur is not only a great warrior, he is also someone who often fights giants and monsters. But this book isn't only about Arthur. It also talks about the mysterious Druids, a priestly class. At first, Arthur and the Druids may not seem connected, but there is an interesting link. Geoffrey of Monmouth said Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, was inspired by a comet in the sky. The Druids were known for studying the stars and were very interested in astronomy. Everything we know about the Druids comes from ancient writers. One of the most detailed descriptions is in the book Commentaries on the Gallic War by Julius Caesar. In this book, Caesar describes his campaigns in Gaul and Britain, and he gives lots of information about the Druids. He says, "In all of Gaul, respected people are divided into 2 groups, the Druids and the Knights. The Druids are in charge of religious matters. They lead both public and private sacrifices and explain all religious questions. Many young men come to learn from them. The Druids are greatly respected by the people. They decide most legal disputes, like murders, inheritance, and border problems. They give rewards or punishments. If someone disobeys them, they are banned from the sacrifices, which is considered the worst punishment. That person is seen as evil and cursed. Everyone avoids them, no one talks to them, and people think bad luck will follow anyone who does. Such people are not allowed to take part in court or public life." Caesar also says that the Druids had one main leader. When that leader died, either the most respected Druid took over, or they elected a new one. Sometimes this even led to fighting. Every year, Druids from all over Gaul met in a sacred place in the middle of the region called Carnutes. People came from all over to ask the Druids to settle their disputes. Caesar believed the Druid tradition began in Britain and then spread to Gaul. People who wanted to learn more would go to Britain to study. In chapter 14 of his book, Caesar says, "Druids don't go to war and don't pay taxes like others. They are free from military service and many other duties. Because of these special rights, many people want to become Druids, either by choice or because their families send them. Their students must memorize many poems and texts, so training can take 20 years. Druids don't write down their teachings, even though they use the Greek alphabet for daily tasks. There are two reasons for this. First, they don't want their teachings to spread too easily. Second, they think writing would make students lazy about memorizing. The Druids believe that souls don't die but move from one body to another. This belief helps people be brave because they don't fear death. They also teach about the stars, the universe, the size of the earth, nature, and the power of the gods. So from this, we learn that Druids were not just religious leaders. They were also judges, teachers, and scientists. They had one main leader and held yearly meetings in sacred places. The Druid tradition started in Britain, and people from Gaul would travel there to learn. We also learned that Druids had to memorize many poems, that becoming a Druid could take 20 years, and that they believed the soul lived on after death. They also taught about astronomy, the natural world, and the gods. In chapter 17, Caesar adds, "The Gauls believe they are all descended from the god of the underworld, Deus." This belief comes from the Druids. Because of this, they count time by nights, not days. Their birthdays, the start of months, and years are all measured from nightfall. Dis, also called Dis Pater, was the Roman god of the underworld, similar to Pluto or Hades in later myths. Another ancient writer who talked about the Druids was Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian from Sicily who lived in the 1st century BC. In his book, Historical Library, he describes the people of Gaul. He says, "In Gaul, there are poets called bards who sing poems with a harp. They sing songs that either praise or insult people. Those who know religious things are greatly respected. They are called Druids and can be seen as philosophers. The Gauls also have seers, or fortune-tellers, who are treated with high respect. They tell the future by watching birds or by sacrificing sacred animals. The whole society listens to them. When the Gauls need to make very important decisions, they do something shocking. They sacrifice a person. They stab the victim above the stomach and then study how they fall, how their body shakes, and how the blood flows to tell the future. They believe no sacrifice is valid unless a Druid is present. They think only those who understand divine knowledge and speak the language of the gods can offer gifts to the gods or perform blessings. During both peace and war, everyone listens to these Druids and bards, even their enemies. When two armies are about to fight, the Druids can step in and stop the battle, almost like they've put the soldiers under a spell. So from this, we learn that in Gaul, there were bards, Druids, and seers. The Druids had a lot of power. They helped decide big decisions, including war and peace. Even enemies listened to them. Sacrifices could only be done with Druids, and they were seen as the connection between people and the gods. Another Greek historian, Strabo, who lived between 64 BC and 24 AD, also wrote about Druids in his book Geography. He said, "In Gaul, there are three respected groups: bards, vates, and Druids. Bards are singers and poets. Vates deal with fortune-telling and the study of nature. Druids study nature too, but also focus on moral philosophy, what is right and wrong. Druids are considered the fairest people, so they are trusted to settle both personal and public disputes." In the past, when two armies were about to fight, Druids could step in and stop the battle. They often handled murder cases, and people believed their decisions affected things like how good the harvest would be. Many people also believed that the soul and the universe cannot be destroyed, even if fire and water could harm them over time. Strabo's words are similar to what Caesar and Diodorus said, but he also introduces the word vates for fortune-tellers, the same people Diodorus called seers. Later, some early Christian writers also talked about the Druids. One of them was Hippolytus of Rome, who lived from around 170 to 236 AD. He wrote a lot about Christian beliefs. but also made a comment about the Druids. He said, "The Celtic Druids were deeply dedicated to Pythagorean philosophy. A man named Zamolxis, who had been a slave of Pythagoras and came from Thrace, brought this philosophy to them after Pythagoras died." Hippolytus connected Druids with Pythagoras probably because both believed in reincarnation, the idea that the soul passes into another body after death. The man Hippolytus calls a slave, Zamolxis, was actually a god of the Getai people who lived near the Danube River. Another Christian writer, Clement of Alexandria, didn't talk directly about Druids, but shared something interesting. He wrote, "Alexander, in his book on the symbols of Pythagoras, says that Pythagoras was a student of Nazaratus the Assyrian. He also says Pythagoras learned from the Galatians and the Brahmins. The Alexander he mentions is Alexander Polyhistor, a writer who lived around 100 BC to 40 AD. The Assyrian Nazaratus is likely Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism in ancient Iran. The Galatians were a Celtic people who moved to what is now central Turkey around 270 BC. So even though Clement didn't mention Druids directly, he talks about how Pythagoras learned from the East and the Celts, which suggests that Druid teachings were seen as philosophical and important. Another Roman writer, Pomponius Mela, who lived around 43 AD, gave more details in his book, The Description of the World. In Book 3, Chapter 2, he says, "The Druids say they know about the size of the world and the sky, the movements of stars, and the will of the gods. They teach noble children many things in a training that can last up to 20 years, usually in caves or hidden forests. Most of this repeats what Caesar wrote a century earlier, but the new detail is that Druid training took place in secret places, like caves or sacred groves. This shows us that Druids were seen as very powerful and respected. They were religious leaders, philosophers, teachers, scientists, and even peacemakers. They believed in the soul's journey after death, studied the stars and nature, and played a big role in both everyday life and spiritual matters. Their knowledge was passed down orally, not written, and training to become a Druid could take 20 years. Their influence was so strong that they could stop battles just by speaking, and people from different cultures, even Greek and Roman thinkers, respected or tried to understand them. We learn more details about Druid practices from Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer who lived between AD 23 and 79. In his book Natural History, Pliny talks about the people of Gaul and says, "I must mention how much the Gauls respect mistletoe. Druids think mistletoe and the oak tree it grows on, especially the hard oak, are the most sacred things. They choose oak forests for their rituals and won't perform any ceremony without oak leaves. That's why they are called Druids, from a Greek word for oak. They believe anything that grows on the oak tree comes from heaven, and that the gods chose that tree. But mistletoe rarely grows on hard oak. When it does, it's picked with great care on the 6th day of the moon. The moon is greeted, and the Druids say a phrase meaning, 'that which heals everything.' Then, they prepare a ritual under the tree. 2 white bulls, with their horns tied, are brought for the ceremony. A Druid, dressed in white clothes, climbs the tree and cuts the mistletoe with a golden sickle. The mistletoe is caught in a white cloth before it touches the ground. Then, they sacrifice the bulls and pray that the gods will make this gift helpful to those who use it. They believe mistletoe can help infertile animals become fertile and can act as a cure for poisons. Pliny also describes how Druids gather another healing plant called celigo. He says, "Celigo looks like a small juniper bush. Druids pick it without using iron tools. The person uses the right hand by reaching it through the left sleeve, like stealing something secretly. They must wear white, have bare feet, and be clean. Before picking the plant, they must offer bread and wine. The plant is wrapped in a new cloth. Druids say that when worn, it protects people from accidents, and the smoke from it helps with eye diseases. So we can see that Druids had very special rules for collecting plants. They only performed rituals with oak leaves, picked mistletoe on the 6th day of the moon, used a gold sickle, and sacrificed white bulls afterward. Silago was collected carefully, without metal, and with special clothes and rituals. All these details raise even more questions than answers. Another Roman writer named Ammianus Marcellinus, who lived in the late 4th century, shares some interesting stories about the people of Gaul. He says, "Old writers didn't agree on who the first people of Gaul were, but a Greek named Timagenes collected old stories and tried to explain it clearly. Some say the first people were called Aborigines, and later named Celts, after a beloved king, and Galatians after his mother. Others say that the Dorian people from Greece followed Hercules and settled on the coasts. The Drycidae, a priestly group, believed some of the people were native, but others came from faraway islands or lands beyond the Rhine River because of wars or floods. Another story says that after Troy was destroyed, some Trojans escaped and settled in Gaul. One popular local belief says this: Hercules, son of Amphitryon, came to defeat two cruel rulers, Geryon in Spain and Toriscus in Gaul. After beating them, he married noble Gaulish women and had many children. Those children named the regions they ruled after themselves. Timagenes was a Greek historian who lived in the 1st century BC. He wrote about Alexander the Great and Gaul, but his works are now lost. The Hercules in the story is a famous half-god hero in Greek myths. The Dorians were one of the main ancient Greek peoples. Amphitryon was said to be Hercules' human father, but actually, Hercules was the son of Zeus. Geryon was a monster. Hercules defeated during one of his famous tasks. These stories, when combined with what other writers said, show that Druids were not just priests. They were also wise thinkers, poets, nature philosophers, and leaders who shaped the lives of their people. There are some very interesting details here. Ammianus uses information from Timagenes, who lived much earlier, so his words may be reliable. Ammianus says the first people in Gaul were Celts, but other sources say some may have come from Germany or distant islands. Some even believed people from Troy ended up in Gaul. One local story says that Hercules had children in Gaul, and those children became rulers. This also supports Caesar's idea that the Druid tradition started in Britain. It also connects Gaul and Troy, which is interesting because the Romans believed their own founder, Aeneas, came from Troy. Pomponius Mela, another Roman writer, tells us that Druids taught in caves and sacred forests. This makes sense, since these places would be great for learning about the stars, the sky, and for collecting plants like mistletoe and selago. In this video, we will explore not only what the Druids taught, but where they came from, and what that tells us about Arthur. Our goal is to show that the comet which gave Uther Pendragon his name might also be what gave us Arthur, and that Arthur may have been the last great gift of the Druids to the people of Britain. We call him the last gift because we believe one of the biggest Anglo-Saxon kingdoms might have actually been founded by Britons. And that means England itself could be part of the Druids' legacy. The Romans invaded Britain in AD 43 and ruled it until about AD 410. But this wasn't their first contact. Julius Caesar had already led 2 missions to Britain in 55 and 54 BC during his Gallic Wars. Caesar believed the Britons were helping his enemies in Gaul, especially a group called the Belgae. These people likely came from northern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. Caesar wanted to stop this support. His first mission in 55 BC failed. Roman troops landed near Kent, but didn't get far. In 54 BC, the second invasion went better. Caesar brought along a Briton named Mandubracius, a prince from the Trinovantes tribe in modern Essex and Suffolk. Mandubracius had lost his throne to a leader named Cassivellaunus and wanted Caesar's help. Caesar crossed the Thames River, probably near Westminster, and attacked Cassivellaunus's fort in Hertfordshire. Cassivellaunus surrendered and agreed to pay tribute to Rome. Mandubracius got his throne back. Both of these leaders later appear in British and Welsh legends, especially in stories from the Mabinogion. Julius Caesar left Britain without leaving any soldiers behind. It wasn't until AD 43 that the Romans seriously invaded the island. Two sons of a local king named Cunobelinus, called Togodumnus and Caraticus, fought back against this Roman invasion. Their tribe, the Catuvalauni, lost 2 battles near the Medway and Thames rivers. Togodumnus was killed, but Caraticus survived and kept fighting. Caraticus made alliances with 2 tribes in eastern Wales, the Silures and the Ordovices, but in AD 51, the Roman governor Publius Ostorius Scapula defeated him. Some of Caraticus's family members were captured, but he escaped and went north to ask for protection from the Brigantes tribe. However, their queen, Cartimandua, supported the Romans. She captured Caraticus, chained him up, and handed him over to the Romans. The Silures continued resisting the Romans and weren't fully defeated until around AD 76. Around this time, the Druids appeared clearly in written history. The Romans saw them as a serious threat. In AD 60, the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus attacked and destroyed Mona, modern Anglesey, which was the Druids' main center in North Wales. The Roman historian Tacitus described the scene in his book, Annals. The enemy was lined up on the shore, ready to fight. Among them were wild-looking women in dark clothes with loose hair, waving torches. The Druids raised their hands and shouted curses. The strange scene shocked the Roman soldiers, who froze in fear and became easy targets. But the general shouted orders, and the soldiers encouraged each other. They realized the women were not magical, so they moved forward, destroyed the enemy, and burned them in their own fires. Afterwards, a Roman base was built in the area, and the sacred groves, dedicated to cruel and superstitious beliefs, were destroyed. These people believed in sacrificing humans and reading the future using their blood and intestines. This shows that the Romans didn't just fight wars, they also tried to destroy the religions and cultures of the people they conquered. Druids weren't just nature lovers, they were spiritual and social leaders. So, when the Romans attacked them, it was also a major cultural attack. But Suetonius couldn't fully finish the conquest of Wales because he had to deal with a major rebellion led by Boudica. She was the queen of the Iceni, a tribe living in what is now Norfolk. Her husband, King Prasutagus, ruled his people under Roman protection and wanted to leave his kingdom to both his daughters and Rome. But after his death, the Romans ignored his will. They took over the kingdom by force, beat Boudica, and attacked her daughters. This led to a large rebellion. Both Tacitus and Cassius Dio, another Roman historian who lived between AD 160 to 230, wrote about it. Dio said that before going into battle, Boudica gave a powerful speech and released a rabbit from her clothes. The rabbit ran in the direction they believed brought good luck. The army cheered loudly. Then Boudica raised her hands to the sky and prayed. "I thank you, Andraste, and I call on you, as a woman to a woman." This is one of the earliest written records of religious practices in Britain. Andraste was likely a local war goddess, possibly connected to a Celtic goddess named Andarta, worshipped in Gaul. Boudica's army included the Iceni and Trinovantes tribes. They first destroyed Camulodunum, which used to be the Trinovantes' capital, but had become a Roman town. There was also a temple for the dead Roman Emperor Claudius. Rome sent a legion to help, but it was defeated. Suetonius rushed to Londinium, but he didn't have enough troops to defend the city, so he evacuated it. The city was burned to the ground. The same happened to Verulamium. Around 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed in these cities. Suetonius gathered his army in the West Midlands, and although they were outnumbered, defeated Boudica at the Battle of Watling Street. Tacitus says Boudica poisoned herself after the loss, but Cassius Dio says she got sick and died, and was buried with honor. The destruction of the Druid center on Mona and the crushing of Boudica's rebellion didn't end Roman rule in Britain. The Romans kept expanding north and tried to conquer Scotland, but they failed. Eventually, they marked the northern border with Hadrian's Wall, started in AD 122, far south of Scotland. So what was Roman Britain like? To understand religious life during Roman rule, we first need to know how the land was organized. Britain was made up of tribes, and the Romans used those tribal areas to set up administrative regions. We can learn about religion in Roman Britain in different ways. By studying temple ruins, by looking at sacred places outside temples, and by examining religious symbols and artwork. In this video, we'll focus on southern Britain, especially a region that stretches from Gloucestershire through Wiltshire and Somerset to Dorset. By exploring temples and religious sites in this area, we'll get a better picture of how religion worked at the time. Let's start with one important temple, the Llew Llaw Temple in Gloucestershire. This area was once home to the Dobunni tribe. Today, Llew Llaw is a small village in a forested valley of the Cotswold Hills. But in Roman times, the settlement and temple were on West Hill, south of the village, overlooking the Severn Valley. Nearby Roman towns included Glevum, about 12 miles north, and Corinium, 16 miles to the east. The Fosse Way, a major Roman road from Exeter to Lincoln, connected towns like Bath and Cirencester. Another road ran southwest from Gloucester, passing right below West Hill along the Severn Valley. The Ancient Documents Research Center at Oxford University is well known for studying the many curse tablets found in Llew Llaw. On their webpage titled Llew Llaw History, they explain, under the Roman temple in Llew Llaw, there are remains of an older religious site. It was a square wooden building surrounded by a ditch, built about 50 years before the Roman conquest. In the early 2nd century AD, a new stone temple was built. It stayed in use for around 300 years. Later, around the 5th century, a new wooden building with a curved back was built on the same spot. In the early 6th century, this was rebuilt with stone. Some think it might have been a church or a baptism site, but we can't be sure. Outside one of these buildings, the head of a statue of Mercury was carefully buried. This means the head was kept safe for at least 100 years after the temple was destroyed. This shows that Mercury, the god, was very important to the Dobunni people. Even after the Romans left and Christianity spread, people respected the statue so much that they saved the head of the god for a long time. That kind of respect shows how deeply important this god was. We don't know exactly which god was worshipped in Llew Llaw before the Romans came. But during the Roman period, the main god was Mercury, who was often connected with the Celtic god Lugus. Researcher Alexei Kondratiev studied this link. He looked at place names like Lugudunon, which show this connection between Lugus and Mercury. As we mentioned earlier, Julius Caesar wrote in his book Gallic Wars that the Gauls especially worshipped Mercury. They saw him as the inventor of all the arts, the guide for travelers, and the god of trade and wealth. That could explain why there are so many altars to Mercury in Celtic areas, but not many with the name Lugus. Under Roman rule, the locals may have used the name Mercury, even when they really meant Lugus. Over 400 altar inscriptions to Mercury have been found in Gaul and Britain. This suggests that Mercury was more important in these areas than he was in the Roman religion itself. In Ule and other places, Mercury is shown with classic Roman symbols, but there are 4 unique Celtic features that Kondratiev points out. He is linked to high places, like mountaintops. For example, the Arverni tribe in France placed a giant statue of Mercury on Puy-de-Dôme mountain. Sometimes he is shown with 3 heads. He is connected to Cernunnos, the horned god. In Belgium and along the Rhine, Mercury is shown holding a spear and standing with a goddess named Rosmerta. Rosmerta means the great provider. She was a goddess of fertility. Kondratiev believes these images show ideas about leadership and power. In Iron Age Celtic society, community leaders and warriors would gather for ritual feasts to strengthen their unity. During these feasts, they would drink a special drink that symbolized their bond with the land and the gods. Rosmerta was the one who held this special drink, and Mercury, with his spear, was the protector of kings and a symbol of power from the otherworld. There's also debate about where the name Lugus comes from. At first, people thought it came from a word that means light, like Latin lux or English light. But Kondratiev suggests it may actually come from a word that means oath or sacred promise. In Old Irish and Welsh, similar words mean oath. Kondratiev supports this idea using a Celtic text found in 1971 in Chamalières, France. That text was part of a ritual prayer for victory in battle. It ends with the words Lug de sumis, which means I prepare them by oath. The word Lug sounds like the name Lugus, so people believe there's a strong link between this god and the idea of sacred oaths. Now, let's look at a second important temple, the one at Lydney Park, also in Gloucestershire. This temple was built inside the walls of an ancient hill fort near iron mines used during both the Iron Age and the Roman period. It stood on a main Roman road that connected Gloucester, the Roman army base at Caerleon, and the capital of the Silures tribe, called Venta Silurum. Lydney is 18 miles from Gloucester and 12 miles from Caerwent. The temple was likely built after AD 364 and was dedicated to the god Nodens. He is linked to the mythological characters Gwyn, the son of Nudd, and Lud Silverhand, whom we met earlier in the story of Kulhuch and Olwin. According to the Oxford University Research Centre's page, Lydney, Deity and Cult, the main god worshipped at the site was indeed Nodens. Evidence includes a curse tablet, 2 metal plaques marked Mars Nodens and Nudens Mars, and mosaics that use the initials MN, which stand for Mars Nodens. The name Nodens is Celtic, and it may come from a word meaning to catch or to trap. He might also be connected to the Severn River and its powerful tidal waves. Outside of Lydney, Nodens is only known from 2 small statues found near Lancaster. At the temple in Lydney, archaeologists found many statues of dogs, made in a special artistic style. One of them is considered one of the best bronze sculptures from Roman Britain. Researchers believe these dog figures might be connected to hunting or healing, but as we'll see in this section, dogs may also be linked to the underworld. Other objects found at the site suggest that the temple may have been used for healing. These include a female figure that was likely an offering to the god, a hollow bronze arm, and a stamp used for making medicine for eye diseases. This stamp shows that a healer may have worked at the site. Not far from there, in the northwest corner of Wiltshire, about 10 miles from the Roman town Aquae Sulis, modern Bath, another temple site was discovered in a place called Nettleton. Nettleton lies just west of the Roman road Fosse Way, which connected towns like Corinium, Lindinus, and Isca Dumnoniorum. The first temple in Nettleton was built around AD 69. It was a rectangle-shaped building on the side of a valley. Archaeologists found many objects here, including a bronze lamp shaped like a chicken, stone carvings, glass items, fancy Roman pottery, and many coins dating as late as the 4th century. The second temple was likely an earlier round-shaped sacred area, and it was later replaced by a third temple built in an octagonal shape. These two later temples were inside a walled area. Construction happened in several stages. A round sacred space from the 2nd century, a stone platform from the 3rd century, and an octagonal temple built in the 4th century. An altar stone says this temple was dedicated to Apollo Cunomaglus, which means Master of the Hounds Apollo. In the 4th century, the temple was changed. Some rooms were closed off, and the shape was changed into a cross, so it may have been used as a church for a while before becoming a pagan temple again. These changes show how religion was evolving in the Roman world in the 4th century. In AD 313, Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal, and it became the official religion. But when Emperor Julian came to power in AD 355, he tried to bring back paganism for a short time. All of this happened as the Romans were slowly losing control of Britain. One sign of this was when the Spanish general Magnus Maximus was declared emperor by British soldiers in AD 383, and then executed in AD 388 by order of the Roman Senate. So who was Apollo Cunomaglus? We don't know much about him outside of Nettleton. His name means Hound Master, and this, along with a link to Diana, suggests that he was connected to both hunting and healing. There is also a carved image that may show Mercury and Rosmerta, suggesting that Cunomaglus might also be linked to the Celtic god Lugus. Another temple was found near the village of Chew Stoke in North Somerset, on a hill above the River Chew. The Oxford University Centre for Ancient Documents says, on their page, Pagan's Hill History and Buildings, that this temple was probably built in the late 3rd century. People lived and worshipped there through the 4th century, with a possible short break, and the site was likely abandoned in the early 5th century. The latest coin found there belongs to Emperor Arcadius, who ruled from AD 383 to 408. It's not clear which god was worshipped at this temple. According to the page Pagan's Hill Deity and Cult, the only clues come from 4 statue pieces. These are parts of a sitting dog, about 80 centimeters tall, wearing a jeweled collar. At first, they were thought to be from the Middle Ages, but later they were confirmed to be from Roman times. In Roman religion, dogs were sometimes linked to Apollo, especially in healing rituals. People believed dogs could guide the sick during healing trances. The Oxford team also points out that the Pagan's Hill Temple had an 8-sided design, like the temple at Nettleton. And since both places had dog symbols, it's possible that both temples were dedicated to Apollo Cunomaglus. Another interesting temple complex was found at Maiden Castle, about 2.5 kilometers south of Durnaveria, modern Dorchester. This was once a huge Iron Age hill fort used by the Duratriges tribe. The site was abandoned for a long time, but a temple was built there in the late 4th century AD. According to English Heritage, the temple had a central room surrounded by a walkway or porch, Nearby, archaeologists found an oval hut built on top of an old Iron Age sacred site, suggesting the area had long been considered holy. A two-room building near the temple may have been used as a priest's house. One of the most interesting finds at Maiden Castle was a statue of a bull with 3 horns. The archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler identified it as Tarvos Triggeranus, which means the bull with 3 cranes. This figure is best known from a famous carving in Paris called the Pillar of the Boatman. It shows a bull under a tree with 3 crane birds on its back. On the next panel, a god named Isis is shown chopping down a tree with an axe. Another carving from Trier in Germany shows a similar scene: a man cutting a tree, 3 birds, and a bull's head. In her book, Pagan Celtic Britain, Anne Ross explains that some legends from Scotland and Ireland say greedy women were turned into crane birds. She believes the 3 birds on the bull's back represent goddesses from the otherworld, or symbols of female spirits. Finally, one more temple site was found 13 kilometers south of Durnaveria, on a hill overlooking Weymouth Bay. This temple was probably built in the 4th century. Today, only the foundations and lower walls remain. It covered a small area, about 25 square meters. In the southeast corner, archaeologists found a deep pit, about 3.5 meters down. At the bottom was a stone grave holding 2 urns, a spearhead, and a sword. On top of this were 16 layers of ash and burned material, each layer containing a bird's remains and a coin, with roof tiles placed in between. Some researchers think the birds were hawks, crows, starlings, or ravens, but scholar Miranda Green believes all were ravens. As Kondratiev explains, the Celtic god Lugus seems to have a special connection to ravens. In an old Greek text called De Fluvius, which is often linked to Plutarch, there is an interesting story about how the city of Lugdunum was founded. The story says that when the city was being built, some ravens came down from the sky. People saw this as a good sign from the gods. But these birds weren't normal ravens. They had white feathers mixed in with their black ones. Because of their unusual appearance, they became the center of a temple used for prophecy. People would leave food on a platform as an offering, and a priest would watch how the ravens reacted. Based on the birds' behavior, the priest would interpret messages from the gods. These special ravens were believed to bring messages from the otherworld. Their black and white feathers made people think they could move between opposite worlds, just like Lugus, who was believed to travel between different realms. In some artworks, a mysterious guardian spirit of Lugdunum is shown with ravens, and many believe this figure is actually Lugus himself. The first sacred place we'll look at is a cave near the village of Alveston in South Gloucestershire. This village is about 1 mile south of Thornbury and 13 miles north of Bristol. It's close to the Severn River estuary and to the temple at Lydney Park, so it lies within the territory of the Dobunni tribe. In 1998, cavers found many bones in the cave. In 2001, the TV show Time Team did an excavation there. According to their website, the cavers had already found lots of dog bones, as well as some human remains, including a skull and a thigh bone. The Time Team archaeologists also found more bones. Some of them showed signs of being cut or broken right after death. Others seemed to belong to people who were killed violently. The team believed that these people, who lived about 2,000 years ago, had been suddenly and violently killed, then cut up and possibly eaten. Radiocarbon dating showed that the bones came from the end of the Iron Age, or the start of the Roman period. This means they had found the most recent case of cannibalism ever discovered in Britain. Some clues about why the bones were placed in the cave came from other finds. Along with the dog bones, there were also cow bones, a possible bear bone, and some wooden sticks. Archaeologist Mark Horton said that this was not random. It looked like a site used for a special kind of ritual. He explained that at the end of the Iron Age, this area was a center for underground or underworld religions, and some of these continued into the Roman period. One of the gods shown in local temple art was the Celtic hunter god Cuno Maglus, often linked to a dog from the underworld. It seems that Cuno Maglus was connected to beliefs about the afterlife that may have included human sacrifices and even cannibalism. Let's now look at what Horton calls an underworld cult. At Jordan Hill, archaeologists found ritual pits from the Roman period, but this kind of practice had existed in southern Britain long before the Romans came. According to Jody Lewis, one important site is the Wilsford Shaft near Stonehenge, in a place called Normanton Down. At first, people thought the shaft was a burial pond, but later they found out it was actually a man-made well, about 30 meters deep and 1.8 meters wide. Excavations showed it held many offerings from the Bronze Age, including a jet ring, amber beads, bone needles, animal bones, and other items made from organic materials. According to the Wiltshire Council, the shaft was built around 2300 BC and used until around 1450 BC. During this time, people placed items like wooden bowls, spoons, leather straps, ropes, amber beads, and bone tools in the shaft, along with Deverell Rimbury pottery. The archaeologist Ashby believed these were not grave goods, but offerings, placed underground in a way similar to how people made offerings to the dead. As Lewis explains, Ashby thought there may be more shafts like this one around the big circular cemeteries of the Wessex region. These may show that underground religious practices from the Iron Age and Roman times actually began in the Bronze Age. These ritual pits will be studied in more detail later, but for now, it's important to say that underground structures like this were still in use during the Roman period around Stonehenge. The Wessex archaeology team studied a Roman-British village at Butterfield Down, near Stonehenge. This village was built in the 2nd century AD and grew the most in the 3rd and 4th centuries. One of the best-known figures connected to the underworld is Orpheus. In ancient stories, Orpheus goes to the world of the dead to rescue his wife Eurydice, and he charms Hades and Persephone with his music. There are 2 mosaics of Orpheus in southern Britain, one in the Woodchester Roman villa in Gloucestershire, and one in the Littlecote Roman villa in Wiltshire. In his book, The Romans at Woodchester, Graham Thomas describes the villa and its mosaic. The building likely began during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, and it was repaired and updated many times over the centuries. According to Giles Clark, the villa didn't have an official Roman function. Instead, it was probably built by the descendants of local tribal leaders from before the Roman conquest. Woodchester is located on an old road between the Roman cities of Aquae Sulis, Corinium, and Glevum. Clark notes that the area around Woodchester is rich in archaeology. Within 5 miles, at least 7 other villas have been found. The famous Orpheus mosaic was made around AD 325 by craftsmen from Corinium. It shows scenes of Orpheus in nature, playing music. The villa was first excavated in the 1790s by Samuel Lyson, who published his findings in a book called Account of the Roman Antiquities, discovered at Woodchester in the county of Gloucester. One of the most impressive finds was a headless marble statue of the goddess Diana Luna, with a sacrificed bull at her feet. This high-quality statue is now in the British Museum and shows how luxurious the villa was. According to Catherine Dunfabin, the Woodchester Roman villa was very large and impressive, with at least 20 rooms decorated with mosaics. The famous Orpheus mosaic is found in the central hall, which is about 50 square meters. In the middle of the mosaic is an octagon-shaped area that shows fish, and it may have been designed as a fountain or water basin. Around it, Orpheus is shown playing his lyre, surrounded by birds. In the next ring, we see animals walking on a plain white background with trees placed between them. These animals include a griffin, bear, leopard, deer, tigress, lion, lioness, boar, dog, and elephant. On the outermost ring, there is a large spiral coming from the head of Oceanus, and in the four corners there are water nymphs placed in column bases. These nymphs are shown with a dark background, which is unusual. The Littlecote Roman Villa is located in Littlecote Park in Wiltshire, near Ramsbury in the Kennet Valley. In Roman times, it was near a small fort called Cunetio, and it stood on two major Roman roads, one going from Caleva Atrebatum to Aquisulis, and the other from Venta Belgarum to Corinium. According to Wikipedia, the area started as a small military post near the river. Around AD 70, the soldiers left, and local people began living in round huts. About 50 years later, those were replaced with a rectangular Roman-style house. Another 50 years later, the house became a two-story villa with wings and corridors. Over time, it was repaired and changed many times, especially around AD 270. By around AD 360, farming had stopped at the Littlecote Villa, and the site began to have a religious use. A large barn was turned into a courtyard, and a three-apsed hall with its own bathhouse was built. This hall had a floor decorated with a famous Orpheus mosaic, which was discovered in 1727 by the manager of Littlecote Park. Some researchers think this religious change was connected to Emperor Julian's effort to bring back pagan religion around AD 362. But after Christianity became the official religion under Emperor Theodosius, around AD 400, the buildings were either destroyed or left in ruins. Martin Hennig explains that the main figure in the mosaic is Apollo, who is connected to Orpheus. There is also a fox, a usual symbol seen with Orpheus, and figures that represent the seasons, riding on animals. These figures are also linked to Apollo. At the ends of the apses, there are sun faces that also refer to Apollo. These sun rays reach to the edges of the panel and may look like seashells, which might represent the soul's journey across the sea to blessed islands, a kind of paradise after death. Other parts of the mosaic show geometric patterns, but one panel decorated with sea panthers suggests a scene from the wild sea parade of Dionysus. There are also two panthers on either side of a cup, another symbol of Bacchus, the Roman name for Dionysus. So it seems this religious space was about a mystical link between Bacchus, Orpheus, and Apollo. All these images seem to be about spiritual salvation. Hennig also says that Dionysus was seen as a savior god who led souls into a new life after death. In mythology, he saves Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, on the island of Naxos, and she joins his joyful procession. In both Greek and Celtic myths, the Blessed Isles were thought to be the heavenly lands where heroes went after death. According to Toynbee, the shell symbol represents the soul's journey to those islands. Also, near Littlecote, in Nettleton Shrub, Apollo was worshipped in the form of Apollo Cunomaglus. At this point, we return to our main study area, Gloucestershire, home of the Dobuni tribe. As said before, in Gaul, the god Mercury was often shown with Rosmerta, a goddess of fertility. While no written dedications to Rosmerta have been found in Britain, there are some images that seem to show her. For example, a carving from Northgate Street in Gloucester, where the Shakespeare Inn now stands, shows figures thought to be Mercury and Rosmerta. Mercury has his usual rooster, staff, caduceus, and winged hat. Rosmerta holds a strange staff in one hand and a ladle reaching into a bucket with iron bands in the other. Another carving from Bath also shows Mercury with his hat, money bag, and caduceus. Rosmerta here also holds a staff-like object, maybe a symbol of power, and leans on a round container. Below the stone, there are 3 small figures in hoods, which show the Celtic character of the pair. According to Green, the mother goddess can also be connected to war. At Daglingworth, near Cirencester, a carving shows a goddess sitting with 3 hooded cucullati figures, 2 of whom hold swords. Another carving at Kingscote, just 3 kilometers east of Uli, shows a goddess on a throne holding bread or fruit, with a warrior standing beside her. The Geni cucullati, or hooded spirits, appear all across the Celtic world, from Austria to Britain. In Britain, Green says, these figures are usually shown in groups of 3, are short in size, and are not sexualized. But they are clearly connected to fertility. They are shown with mother goddesses, and they often carry eggs. These figures appear in both northern and southern Britain. For example, near Hadrian's Wall, in a small 3rd century temple beside the Vercovicium fort, 3 cucullati figures were found. They were wrapped in heavy cloaks. The one in the middle had a male face, while the others may be female, or represent a young and old male. In southern Britain, cucullati seem to have many meanings. In places like Springhead in Kent and Bath, they were linked to healing springs. In Lower Slaughter in Gloucestershire, 2 groups of cucullati are shown with a worshipper. The well there may have been part of a healing water cult. But since they are also shown with rosettes and 2 ravens, they may also represent the underworld. In the area where the Dobuni tribe lived, the cucullatus figures were directly linked to a mother goddess. In one carving from Corinium, a goddess named Cuda is shown offering something to a group of 3 cucullatus figures. In another carving, a mother figure holds a cake or fruit, and nearby cucullatus spirits are shown carrying swords, as if to protect her. In a 3rd stone, a mother goddess is shown with fruit, while the cucullatus next to her carries an egg. 2 carvings from Wycombe, near Llew Llaw, also show these symbols that are often linked with fertility. In short, the connection between cucullatus figures and the mother goddess is made even stronger by the fact that these spirits are usually shown in groups of 3. This shows how themes like fertility, the afterlife, and healing were all connected in Celtic Roman religion. These images from Dobuni lands help us better understand religion in Roman Britain and later Welsh mythology. The bucket, or large pot, often shown with the mother goddess, is thought to be a kind of cauldron. Since cucullatus figures are linked with fertility, healing, and the other world, especially the ones at Lower Slaughter, which seem to come up from a well, this cauldron could be related to the one we see in the story of Kulhuch and Olwin, called Dirnach's Cauldron. It also reminds us of the cauldrons of rebirth found in other stories, like the spoils of Annwn and the second branch of the Mabinogion. When talking about cauldrons like this, we should also mention the famous Gundestrup cauldron from Denmark. It's a large silver vessel from the 1st century BC, discovered in 1891 in a bog near Gundestrup village. The silverwork looks like it's from Thrace, but the pictures on it are clearly Celtic. Some designs show Thracian influences, but most reflect Celtic myths. One panel, called the E-plate, shows a row of warriors with spears and shields, along with men blowing carnixes. On the left side, a large figure is pushing a man into a big cauldron, which probably represents bringing someone back to life. Above, horsemen are shown riding away from the cauldron scene. The most famous panel is the A-plate. It shows a horned man sitting cross-legged. He holds a torque in one hand and grabs a horned snake with the other. On the left, there's a horned deer that looks like him. Around the scene, there are animals like a dog, cat, bull, elephant, and a person riding a fish or dolphin. This scene looks similar to a seal from Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, dated to between 2600 to 1900 BC. Many people think this figure is the Celtic god Cernunnos, a horned god of nature. He is sometimes linked to Mercury, but he's mostly known as Cernunnos. One of the best-known images of him is on the Pillar of the Boatman in Paris, where he appears alongside Celtic and Roman gods. In Britain, images of Cernunnos are rare, but one can be found in Corinium, showing him with snakes instead of legs, and the snakes are eating fruit or grain near his head. 3 other panels on the Gundestrup cauldron are also interesting. On the sea plate, a bearded figure holds onto a broken wheel. Next to him is a smaller figure with a horned helmet, also touching the wheel. Underneath is a horned snake, and around them are griffins and other creatures. No one knows exactly who the main figure is, but in Gaul, many carvings show a bearded god holding a wheel and lightning bolt. The Roman poet Lucan, in his poem Pharsalia, talks about the terrifying Gaulish gods Teutates, Jesus, and Tyrannus, who were said to accept bloody sacrifices. Based on ancient writings and names of Gaulish gods like Taranukno, Taranuo, and Taraino, and the Welsh word Taranu, meaning to thunder, many people believe the figure is Taranis, the Gaulish god of thunder. The bottom plate of the cauldron is also well described by Green. In the middle, there is a large image of a dying bull. A female figure, who clearly looks human and has visible breasts, holds a knife or sword and is attacking the animal. There's also a hunting dog or wolf, and underneath the bull are 2 more dog-like creatures. The bull is carved in high relief, and its head sticks out dramatically. It has holes in its horns, possibly to attach real decorations. Its back rises up, and its neck and shoulders have leaf-like patterns, while vines and plant leaves surround the entire scene. Another panel, called the D-plate, is often seen as a bull sacrifice scene. It shows 3 bulls lined up side by side, all facing the same way. Each has a thick neck and strong back legs. Under each bull is a man in attack position, and below their feet, there are dogs running to the left. On the bulls' backs, there are cat-like creatures also moving in the same direction. In summary, the scenes on the Gundestrup cauldron bring together key Celtic gods, like Cernunnos and Tyrannus, as well as symbols of war, rebirth, and the magical cauldron, showing how British religious beliefs were connected to wider Eurasian myths. Earlier, we mentioned Mabon, the son of Modron, who appears in the story of Kulhuch and Olwin. In Celtic religion, Mabon is the Welsh version of the Gaulish god Maponos, which means divine son or young boy. The word Mapos in the Gaulish language means boy or son. In Gaul, we know about Maponos from inscriptions, especially in northeastern and central France. But most evidence of his worship comes from northern Britain, such as in Brampton, Corbridge, Ribchester, and Chesterholm, near the Scottish border. One especially interesting find is a magical text from Chamalieres, where people call on the god for help. Mabon's mother, Modron, comes from the Gallic goddess Matrona, whose name was also given to the Marne River in France. Modron is directly linked to a group of goddesses called Diae Matris, or Diae Matronae, usually shown as 3 women together. These goddesses were worshipped in eastern Gaul, Germany, and northern Italy, and they represented fertility. According to Wikipedia, they are always shown facing forward, usually in groups of 3. The middle one holds a basket of fruit, while the others wear head coverings. These scenes often include incense, offerings, and decorations with fruits and plants. This belief spread to Britain as well. According to Hennig, there are inscriptions and altars dedicated to these goddesses in Dover, Winchester, York, and Londinium. In Corinium and Aquae Sulis, a sculptor named Sulinus dedicated offerings to the Matres Sulevii, meaning the good mother goddesses. These three goddesses are also connected with the Dobuni tribe's mother goddess, and with the Cucullatus or hooded spirits we talked about earlier. Maponos and Matrona were gods mostly worshipped in northern Britain. In a group of medieval Welsh writings called the Welsh Triads, we learn that Modron, a figure connected to Matrona, was the mother of Owain, the son of Urien, a king of Reged in the 6th century. Another goddess we need to talk about is Epona. Her name is related to the Welsh word ebol, which means foal or young horse, and her name means great mare. Epona was the protector of horses, donkeys, and mules, and also a goddess of fertility. Her symbols included a patera, a cornucopia, and sheaves of grain. In some statues, she is shown with baby horses. Scholar Henri Hubert believed that Epona and her horses also helped guide the souls of the dead to the afterlife. Epona's cult was popular across the Roman Empire, especially between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD. She is mentioned in two famous Roman books, the Golden Ass by Apuleius and the Satires by Juvenal. According to Green, Epona was worshipped most in eastern Gaul and along the German frontier. One of the most important finds related to Epona in Britain is a small bronze statue from Wiltshire. In the statue, Epona is sitting between two small horses. She holds a patera full of grain in her right hand and a yoke, used for animals, in her left. This horse goddess gives us clues about prehistoric religion in Britain, which we'll explore more later, especially through ideas like the cauldron, triple goddesses, and the hooded spirits from Gloucestershire. The poem The Spoils of Annwn is said to have been written by the bard Taliesin between 800 and 1000 AD, though some experts, like John Coke, believe it may have been written even earlier. Most of the poems claimed to be by Taliesin are found in a collection called the Book of Taliesin, put together around 1350 AD. Taliesin was a real historical poet, but not all the poems in the book are truly his. Taliesin's name appears in a historical document called Historia Brittonum, written around 830 AD, which says, Deutigern fought bravely against the Angles. At the same time, Talhaiarn Catagen, Neirin, Taliesin, Bluchbard, and Cian, also called Gwyneth Gwaut, became famous poets of Britain. Taliesin is mentioned here alongside Aneirin, another well-known bard who lived in the 6th century and wrote the heroic poem Gododin. The other three poets, Talhaiarn, Tad Awen, Bluchbard, and Cian, are mostly forgotten today. Taliesin is said to have lived during the time of Deutigern and Maelgwyn, a 6th century king of Gwynedd, a kingdom in northwest Wales. Maelgwyn was descended from Suneda, the founder of Gwynedd. Only about 11 poems in the Book of Taliesin seem to come from the 6th century. Many of these praise King Urien of Reged and his son Owain. The kingdom of Reged was in what is now northwest England, Cumbria, and may have included parts of Lancashire and southern Scotland. Taliesin probably worked as a court poet in this area, maybe based in Carlisle. Some poems also suggest he served in Powys, in what is now Wales, possibly in the Roman town of Viroconium. But The Spoils of Annwn probably wasn't written by the historical Taliesin. Its style and content are very different from praise poems. To understand this poem better, Scholars like Sarah Higley have translated and analyzed it. But before we look at the poem, it's important to know that it was written in Old Welsh, and many parts are hard to understand today. Every translation is partly an interpretation, and different translators give very different versions. One of the best-known translations was done in the 19th century by W.F. Skene. The poem begins with these lines: "Praise to the High Lord, ruler of the land. His power reaches all corners of the world. Gwir was imprisoned in the fortress of the Mound, a place from the stories of Pwyll and Pryderi, where no one had gone before. He was bound with heavy chains, guarded by a loyal servant. He sang sad songs before telling of the treasures of Annwn. The bard's chant, meant to last until the end of time, began like this: 3 times we boarded the ship Prydwen and sailed to that fortress, but only 7 men came back alive from Caer Sidi." These lines describe the start of a journey to the otherworld, known as Annwn. The first place they visit is Caer Sidi, which means Fortress of the Mound. To understand this name, we must not only look at Old Welsh, but also the Indo-European language family to which Welsh belongs. This family includes languages like English, French, Persian, Latin, Hindi, Greek, and Welsh, and stretches from Portugal and Ireland in the west to India and Pakistan in the east. Sometimes comparing words in different Indo-European languages helps us understand their deeper meanings. For example, the word caer in Welsh means fort or castle. It comes from a much older root word, cat, meaning shelter or hut. This same root appears in many old languages. Here are some examples. In Avestan, an old Iranian language, kata means room. In Old Iranian, kad means house. In Latin, casa means hut, and castrum means military camp. In Old English, heathor means prison or enclosed space. In Welsh, cater means fort. In Old Irish, cathir means town. These connections show how words traveled across cultures and changed over time. So, Caer Sidi is not just a real fortress. It could also be a symbol of the unknown, the otherworld, or a place beyond normal time. As the poem The Spoils of Annwn continues, it talks about more fortresses, more symbols, and more mythical themes. This helps us think about what the poem really means, and who might have written it. In the poem, the word Sidi is related to the Irish word Sid, or Siege, which refers to mounds or hills in nature. People believed these were places where supernatural beings lived. Scholar Koch says these mounds were often seen as entrances to the otherworld. Another scholar, Falileev, explains that the root of this word is very old and appears in many languages. For example, in Old Irish, Sid means mound or peace. In Cornish, Asedva means assembly. In Old Welsh, Gorsedd means gathering place. In Middle and Modern Welsh, sed or sed means sat. These words all come from the Indo-European root sed, meaning to sit. From this same root we get Latin seds, seat, Sanskrit sadhus, a sacred place where rituals happen. In ancient Hindu texts like the Rig Veda, sadhus is where the gods received their soma offerings. Even though the Sidi mounds in Britain weren't necessarily ritual sites, it's clear they had a strong connection to the otherworld. In the poem, it says a man named Gwir was held prisoner in Caer Sidi. We don't know much about him, but in a Welsh triad called the Three Noble Prisoners, Gwir is mentioned along with Mabon, son of Modron, and Llew. Llew is an important but quiet character in the Mabinogion, a collection of Welsh myths. Both Gwir and Mabon seem to share something. They both suffer in prison. Gwir sings sad songs, and in another tale, Mabon cries out in pain while locked in a dungeon in Gloucester. The poem says Gwir was imprisoned because of something related to Pwyll and Pryderi. Pwyll was a king in West Wales, and in the Mabinogion, he ruled the otherworld for a year and a day. Pryderi was his son. The word ebostol used in the poem might come from Christian language and could mean messenger or letter, but it's unclear. Was Gwir imprisoned because of messengers they sent, or because of a message? This mysterious journey to the otherworld is made on a ship called Prydwen, which means fair-faced. Only 7 men came back alive from Caer Sidi. This idea of 7 survivors also appears in another Mabinogion tale, where only 7 men return from an expedition to Ireland. One of them is the legendary bard Taliesin, though Arthur is missing from that version. The next part of the poem goes, I was praised in song. Songs were heard in the 4-peaked fortress, which turns 4 times. My poem was spoken through the cauldron. It was born from the breath of 9 maidens. The cauldron of Annwn's chief. What is its shape? It has a dark border and is decorated with pearls. It does not cook for cowards. Their fate forbids it. Llew's shining sword pointed at it. It was left in the hand of Lemanach, and lamps were burning at the gate of hell. We went with Arthur, shining through hardship. But only 7 men returned from the fortress of drunkenness. Now, the journey continues to a new place called Caer Pedriwen, which Sarah Higley translates as 4-peaked fortress, though it could also mean 4-cornered fortress. To understand these names, we need to go beyond medieval texts and look at older myths. After all, most of what we know comes from either Roman records or stories changed by Christian beliefs. This brings us to Varuna, a god from the ancient Indian book Rigveda. Varuna ruled the sky, water, and divine law, and he also watched over the souls of the dead. In ancient Iranian religion, Varuna's image changed over time and appeared as gods like Apam Napat and Ahura Berizant, according to scholars Mary Boyce and Franz Grenet. In a Zoroastrian text called the Vendidad, one of the good places made by the god Ahura Mazda is called Varena, with 4 corners. This is the 14th of 16 good lands. It's also where the hero Thraitaona was born. But the text also says this place is filled with evil spirits called the Varenya Devas. So what does all this mean? It suggests that places like Caer Pedriwen were not only important in British myths, but were part of a much older, wider system of Indo-European mythology. The number 4, and ideas like 4 corners or 4 peaks, often symbolize order and sacred power. The story of Gwyr's imprisonment, the cauldron, Arthur's journey, and the idea of the otherworld all reflect deeper themes that go beyond just Celtic myth. They are part of a shared, ancient imagination found across many cultures. The idea of something being 4-sided or 4-cornered also shows up in Hindu stories about the sky god Varuna. A scholar named Petadzoni says Varuna was called Kataranika, meaning 4-faced. This name isn't really about power. It means he could look in all 4 directions because he was a sky god. In the Rigveda, there's a line that says, Mitra Varuna has a scary, 4-cornered lightning bolt, using the word Katurasrir, meaning 4-cornered. Varuna's name might come from an old word root wir, which means to cover, protect, or close in many Indo-European languages. From this root we get Sanskrit, varati, to protect, varutar, protector, varutha, defense, Vedic, vritra, a demon of drought who hides water, Avestan, ancient Iranian, varetha, a weapon for defense, Old Irish, fertai, mound or tomb, Middle Welsh, gwerther, fortress, German, ver, defense. All these connections show that the idea of a four-cornered or four-peaked place may be very old and connected to the sky or divine power. Still, Caer Sidi, the magical fortress in Welsh legend, seems more connected to the earth than the sky. This contrast is interesting. In Hindu and Irish tradition, four-faced Varuna and four-cornered Varina become a fortress in Britain and a burial mound in Ireland. Another key part of Caer Pedruan is the cauldron. We've seen magic cauldrons before, in the story of Kulhuch and Olwin, and in the artwork on the Gundestrup cauldron, a silver bowl with strange pictures. In the second branch of the Mabinogion, a collection of Welsh stories, there's a cauldron owned by Bran. The Irish use this cauldron to bring dead warriors back to life. In the Spoils of Annwn poem, the cauldron is said to be the source of Taliesin's poems. This magical cauldron belongs to the ruler of Annwn. It has a dark border, is decorated with pearls, will not cook for cowards, and is brought to life by the breath of 9 maidens. Let's start with these 9 maidens. If the number sounds familiar, that's because in the old poem, Pa Gur, Arthur's knight Kay says he once killed 9 witches. Surprisingly, we know a lot about these women. A Roman geographer named Pomponius Mela wrote about an island off the coast of Britain called Sena, where a god was worshipped. On this island lived 9 priestesses called the Senae, known for their great wisdom. People believed they could create storms, turn into animals, heal deadly diseases, and tell the future. These 9 women also appear in the story of Saint Samson, a 6th century Christian saint from Wales who later moved to Brittany. In a life story written between 610 and 820 AD, Samson meets a strange woman in a forest. She says, "I am a sorceress. My kind is seen as sinful. I have 8 sisters and a living mother. They're deep in the forest. My husband died and left me here, so I can't leave." This makes 9 women again. They show up once more in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Life of Merlin. He describes the island of Avalon, also called the Blessed Island, where everything grows naturally without farming. Grapes and grain grow on their own. Apple trees give fruit in the shade. People live over 100 years. 9 sisters rule the land, using their own peaceful laws. The oldest, wisest, and most beautiful is Morgan. She knows the healing power of every plant, can treat sickness, change her form, and even fly like Daedalus. After the Battle of Camlan, Arthur is taken there to heal. Another story about 9 women comes from a 13th century Welsh tale called Peredur fab Efraug, based on Chrétien de Troyes' Percival and the Holy Grail. In it, Peredur visits a castle. He's given food but no place to sleep. The reason? 9 sorceress women from Gloucester and their parents live here. They've destroyed the land. If we don't escape by morning, they'll kill us. Peredur decides to stay. In the morning, one of the witches attacks a guard, and Peredur kills her. She says, "Do you know who I am? It was my fate to be wounded by you. Now I'll become your student. Please forgive me." He agrees, and she takes him to the witch's palace. He stays for 3 weeks, then leaves with a horse and armor. The strangest part is that these witches are said to come from Gloucester. That connects them to the 9 maidens of Annwn, and possibly to the Dobuni tribe's mother goddess, who is often shown carrying a bucket or cauldron. There are also links to other female figures, like the hooded spirits, shown in 3s, and the maters, or mother goddesses, who are also often shown in groups of 3. All of this suggests that the 9 women are part of a very old tradition in British religion. Since the Bretons originally came from Britain, this makes sense. Over time, pagan priestesses were turned into witches under Christian influence, except in Geoffrey's story, where they still have power and wisdom. Maybe Geoffrey even read Mela's description of the priestesses on the island of Sena. Another special thing about Annwn's cauldron is that it doesn't cook food for cowards. Because of this, some people have compared it to the Holy Grail. The Grail appears for the first time in Chrétien de Troyes' story, Perceval. In that story, Perceval is a young man who meets knights and decides to go to Arthur's court. A girl there says he will do great things. Although Kay makes fun of him, Perceval defeats a knight outside and takes his red armor. He has many adventures, saves and falls in love with Blanchefleur, and learns from an old knight named Gourmont. One day, Perceval sees two men fishing from a boat. He can't cross the river, so one of the men invites him to a nearby house. Perceval climbs a hill and finds a tower and a great hall. Inside, a noble old man welcomes him, but can't stand up due to illness. A servant brings in a sword sent by the old man's nephew, and the old man gives it to Perceval. Then another servant enters carrying a white spear dripping blood. But Perceval remembers Gourmont's advice not to ask too many questions, so he stays silent. More servants come, carrying big candles. Then, a young girl entered, holding a bowl in her hands. She was beautiful, graceful, and well-dressed. The bowl gave off so much light that the candle flames seemed dim, just like the stars fade when the sun or moon rises. Another girl followed her, carrying a silver serving tray. The first bowl was made of pure gold and decorated with the world's finest jewels, stones from both the sea and the earth. This golden bowl is the Holy Grail, a symbol of something sacred, mysterious, and powerful. Like Annwn's cauldron, it's surrounded by magic, courage, and mystery. Perceval didn't ask who the special cup was for. Then he and the old man ate dinner at a table made of ivory. The cup was brought out again, but Perceval still said nothing. That night, the old man apologized and was taken to his bedroom. The next morning, Perceval woke up and found the hall empty. Everyone had left. As he rode away, the bridge lifted itself and closed behind him. On the road, he met a young girl crying under an oak tree. She was holding the cut-off head of a knight. Another knight had killed him earlier that morning. She asked Perceval where he had stayed the night before. He told her about the tower and the hall. The girl explained that the man he stayed with was the Fisher King. The king had been wounded in both thighs during a battle and was still in great pain. His only joy now was fishing. The girl scolded Perceval. If you had just asked one question, you could have healed the king. The Holy Grail is believed to be the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. In French, the word Graal comes from the Latin gradalis, which means a dish used to serve food during a feast. In Chrétien's version of the story, the Grail is a wide and deep bowl or plate. Later, Perceval finds out that inside the Fisher King's Grail, there is only one holy piece of bread, and the king has lived on just that for 12 years. Like the magical cauldron of Annwn, this Grail is decorated with jewels. Just as the cauldron doesn't cook for cowards, the Grail can only be seen by people who are worthy. Perceval missed his chance to heal the king because he didn't ask the important question. In the poem The Spoils of Annwn, it says that Llew Llaw raised his shining sword toward the cauldron, and the sword was left in the hand of Llewellyn. Scholar Sarah Higley thinks this scene is similar to one in the tale of Kulhuch and Olwin, where Arthur and his men must take a cauldron from an Irish giant named Diarnach Whittle. When the giant refuses to give it, Bedwyr grabs the cauldron and puts it on the back of Arthur's servant, Hygwid. Hygwid was the half-brother of another servant named Cachambri. Hygwid's job was always to carry Arthur's cauldron and light the fire beneath it. Then, Llew Llaw the Irishman takes a sword, probably Excalibur, and uses it to kill the giant and his men. From this, we can guess that Lluch in the poem might be the same as Llew Llaw the Irishman. This character shows up early in Kulhuch and Olwin and helps take the cauldron. The name Llewellyn might be linked to another knight in the same story called Llew Llaw, meaning something like windy hand or striking hand. This name could be related to the Irish god Llew, who was also known as a strong warrior. Higley thinks some name mix-ups or copy mistakes might have happened over time. In this story, it's clear that Arthur visited Annwn, the otherworld, for the first time. The place is called the Castle of Drunkenness. In early British culture, mead was very important. The poem Gododin confirms this. Mead is mentioned 43 times, and even Arthur is named. It tells of warriors who drank mead before the Battle of Catreth. They went to Catreth, brave warriors. Pale mead was their drink. It was a deadly poison. At dawn, they went to battle. Joy had stolen their lives. They drank mead, golden and sweet, magical. Poets sang for a year afterward. Then they attacked, all raised together. For a year, they planned while drinking mead. Their stories are sad. Their longing never ends. Their homes are ruined, their children gone. They died in feasts of wine and mead, famous fighters who didn't fear death. They stood around their cups, excited by drink. Wine, mead, and braggot were always in their hands. In the poem, mead starts out as a happy and joyful thing, but ends up as a symbol of tragedy. The fact that one place in Annwn is linked to mead suggests that it wasn't just for drinking. It had a mythical and sacred meaning. This reminds us of the Irish queen Medb, whose name is related to mead and means she who intoxicates. In Irish stories, Medb is the queen of Connacht and was married to several kings. Many believe she was actually a goddess of sovereignty, and kings would marry her symbolically to gain power. The poem also mentions the gates of hell. In Welsh, this is Porth Ufern, from Latin porta, gate, and infernus, auto hell. This shows how the poem mixes both Christian and pagan symbols, making it rich and layered in meaning. In the third part of the poem, The Spoils of Annwn, we return to the four-peaked fortress. It's clearly an island and has a strong door. The poet speaks proudly of himself and his voice echoing in this mysterious place. The next lines say that water and jetstone are mixed there. Jet is a shiny black stone found in prehistoric graves and Roman towns. In ancient times, people believed jet could protect against evil spirits. Saint Isidore of Seville wrote that jet reacts to water, burns with water, goes out with oil, scares snakes, exposes possessed people, and even reveals if someone is a virgin. So when the poem says water and jet are mixed, it likely means something magical and protective, not just a place with rocks. Later, the poem talks about the 3 fillings of Prydwen, Arthur's famous ship. On one journey, many went aboard, but only 7 returned alive from the Castle of Harshness. This 7 survivors idea also appears in another Welsh story. In the second branch of the Mabinogion, after a war with the Irish, only 7 people survive, along with Bran's severed head. They live for 80 years on a magical island called Gwales. Bran warns them, "You can stay as long as you want, as long as you don't open the door that looks toward Cornwall." Of course, someone eventually opens it. All their grief, pain, and memories rush back, especially Bran's death. This strong door is a boundary between the living and the dead. It's strong because it holds back sorrow and offers peace to the dead. Toward the end, the poem mentions the Castle of Harshness. Sometimes this is translated as Castle of the King, because the Old Irish word re means king. This word comes from the same root as Latin rex, Gaulish rix, and Sanskrit raja. Other words from this root mean things like to raise up the hand or to stand tall. The Latin word rigor might also be related. The exact meaning of care rigor will be discussed later, but for now, the idea of harshness or kingship suggests a strong ruling power. In the end, the poem makes it clear that the four-peaked fortress is an island and connected to the otherworld. The poem creates a rich and magical world filled with water, jetstone, holy doors, chosen travelers, and the echoes of the lost past. In the fourth part of the poem, the poet starts by saying, "He's not worthy of being among God's holy scholars." This could be either a joke or a humble way to begin a spiritual part of the story. Then he talks about the glass castle. This castle is where Arthur's bravery was not seen. The poem says 6,000 men stand on its walls, and it's nearly impossible to reach or speak with anyone inside. Arthur's ship, Prydwen, joined the journey again, and once more only 7 returned. The others stayed behind in what the poem calls the inner castle, or castle of barriers. The glass castle has sometimes been connected to Glastonbury, a town in Somerset, England. This idea comes from the writings of a 12th century Welsh Norman priest and author named Giraldus Cambrensis. In his 2 books, De Principis Instructione and Speculum Ecclesiae, he talks about this. In the first book, he says, "The place we now call Glastonbury used to be called the Island of Avalon. It looked like a real island because it was surrounded by swamps. In Welsh, it was called Ynys Avalon, meaning Island of Apples, because apples grew there in large numbers. After the Battle of Camlan, a noblewoman named Morgan, who was related to King Arthur and protected the area, took the wounded Arthur there to heal him. In even older times, it was also called Ynys Gwytrin, which means Glass Island in Welsh." In the second book, he continues, "After being badly wounded in the Battle of Camlan, King Arthur's body was taken to Avalon by his cousin Morgan. Today, we call that place Glastonbury. The name Avalon might come from the Welsh word aval, meaning apple, because apples grew there. Or it could come from a ruler named Vallo, who once ruled the area. Another idea is that it was called Glass Island because the river around it looked shiny like glass." These stories are inspired by Geoffrey of Monmouth's book The Life of Merlin, but this time Glastonbury Hill, which used to be surrounded by swamps, is clearly linked with Avalon. A similar story appears in a book called Historia Brittonum. There, a writer named Nennius says that the Milesians, mythical Irish settlers, saw a glass tower in the middle of the sea during their voyage. There were men inside the tower, but they gave no answer when the sailors called out to them. This is a lot like a scene from the second branch of the Mabinogion, where dead men are brought back to life by Bran's cauldron, but cannot speak. At the end of this part of the poem, another castle is mentioned, Caer Golud, which means inner castle or castle of barriers. The exact meaning is unclear. Some translators think it means castle in the center of the world or hidden castle. In modern Welsh, Golud means wealth or treasure. The 6th century historian Bede also mentions a place called Urbs Coludi near Saunt. Ab's Head in Scotland, where a woman named Ebbe founded a monastery. This may be a related name. In the end, the descriptions of the glass castle and the inner castle are full of symbols that mix Celtic myths, early Christian stories, and the legend of King Arthur's journey toward immortality. The glass castle appears as both a mystical place and a gateway between worlds. Arthur's journey, from which only 7 companions return alive, is a blend of heroism, wisdom, and death. In this part of the poem, the speaker says, "I am not worthy of God's little scholars. Men with loose shield straps cannot carry this knowledge." He then mentions some mysterious people and places. They don't know who created whom or when. They don't know what time of day Kwai was born. They don't know who created the one who never went to Defwy's meadows. These lines bring up deep questions about time, creation, and wisdom, while also referring to names and places whose meanings are now mostly forgotten. We don't really know what Kwai or the Defwy meadows mean today. Then, a strange creature appears. They don't know the speckled ox with a collar of 7 double rings. This ox might be related to a story in Kulhuch and Olwin, where a man named Gwlyd owns 2 dull-colored oxen. It may also remind us of other bulls in the same story, like the horned ox across the mountain, or the yellow and speckled bull. This ox is also similar to a sculpture found at Maiden Castle, showing a bull called Tarvos Trigoranus, and to images of bulls on the Gundestrup cauldron. On the Gundestrup cauldron, bulls are shown being sacrificed. The Roman writer Pliny said that Celtic priests sacrificed bulls. This tradition appears again in the Irish myth The Wasting Sickness of Cuchulainn, written in the 10th or 11th century. In that story, a white bull is killed, a man eats its meat and drinks its broth. Then 4 Druids say magic words over him. In a dream, the man sees a future king. The 7 double rings on the ox's collar remind us of a line in another poem by Taliesin called Angar Kifindaut, 7-fold Ogyrvan, lies in inspiration. The word awen, inspiration, comes from the same root as the Welsh word awel, which means breeze or wind. The meaning of Ogyrvan is unknown, but in Taliesin's other poem, The Throne of the Ruler, he says, "Truth is high when it shines, higher still when it speaks. It is highest when it rises from the cauldron, the 3 inspirations of Gogyrwin." So the speckled ox is likely a symbol of poetic inspiration and ancient knowledge. When the little men don't recognize the ox, it means they lack this deep wisdom. Finally, Arthur arrives at another castle on his journey to the otherworld, the Castle of God's High Place. This castle appears in other early Welsh texts. In a dialogue between Gwydno Garanhir and Gwyn ap Nudd, Gwyn says, "I am sad, for I saw a battle before Caer Vandwy. There, shields were broken and ribs crushed. The attacker was noble and great." Gwyn ap Nudd, meaning Gwyn son of Nodens, is also in Kulhuch and Olwin. He is known for kidnapping Creidelad, the daughter of Llew Llaw errant. She had earlier run away with Gwyn's rival, Gwythyr ap Greidawl. Because of this rivalry, Gwyn and Gwythyr are forced to fight every year on May Day, a battle that represents the mythic struggle between summer and winter, or life and death. If Gwyn is connected with this castle, then Caer Vandwy may also represent a deeper idea, a balance between life and death, light and dark, summer and winter. Like the other castles in the poem, the Castle of God's High Place is not just a real place. It also symbolizes a spiritual journey, a gateway between worlds. The 6th part of the poem begins with a complaint about certain people. The speaker calls them small men, meaning ordinary people who lack wisdom. He says, "I am not worthy of the small men. Their will is weak and soft. These people don't understand how the world began or how things are ordered. They don't know what day the leader was created or what time the master was born. They don't know what animal was in their hands. With a silver head, they do not know." This connects back to earlier parts of the poem, where people were criticized for not understanding ancient knowledge. The silver-headed animal might be the same speckled ox with the fancy collar mentioned earlier, a symbol of deep wisdom. The poet is clearly upset that most people have lost this kind of understanding. Next, the speaker returns to Arthur's journey. When we went with Arthur, it was a sad battle. And except for 7, no one came back from the fort of strong walls. This is the 7th castle in the poem, called Caer Ochran. Some scholars translate this name as closed castle or hidden castle. The Welsh word ochre means slope or mountainside. In Roman times, a place in Cornwall was called Ochrinum, and the Greek word ochrin and Latin ochris both mean rocky, steep mountain. So Caer Ochran could be a far-away, hard-to-reach place, both physically and spiritually. This part of the poem is both a criticism of ignorant people and a new stop on Arthur's mythical journey with 7 companions. Then, the poem describes the people the poet dislikes, probably monks or religious leaders, and says they are like young wolves huddling together, afraid to meet true wisdom. They don't know the time between midnight and dawn. They don't know where the wind comes from or where it blows. They don't know which land it strikes. Then comes a mysterious line. The grave of the saint, perhaps lost, perhaps hidden in the otherworld, has been erased, both in body and meaning. But the speaker says he will still praise God to avoid sadness because Christ brings him comfort. Here we understand that the small men are actually the new religious leaders, and the poet thinks they don't understand the old Celtic wisdom. For example, the line about not knowing when midnight ends and dawn begins may refer to how the ancient Gauls counted the start of the day from night, not from morning. Forgetting this is a symbol of losing old knowledge. Line 58 is open to many meanings. Some ways to translate it include, the saint's grave has vanished, and his memory is gone. The saint's grave is hidden, and his spirit is forgotten. How many saints are lost in the otherworld? How many are still known today? How many holy people are missing, and how many sacred places are abandoned? In every version, the word diwant gives a feeling of being lost, erased, or forgotten. The poet is mourning not just the loss of people, but also the loss of ancient memory and culture. Some people think the spoils of Annwn is about a real military raid, because it's similar to a story in the Mabinogion, where Bran leads an army to Ireland. In both stories, only 7 people survive. There's a magic cauldron, a strong gate, and a silent guard. But like all good poems, this one doesn't have just one meaning. A Scottish writer named Lewis Spence said in 1905 that this poem is more like a story of raiding the underworld. A hero goes into the dark world, defeats its powers, and steals its secrets and treasures. Spence believed this was part of a ritual in the mystery religions of Britain, where a person would go through a symbolic journey to be accepted into a secret spiritual group. If we look at it that way, the journey in the poem is not about war, but about a search for wisdom and spiritual awakening. The first stop on this journey is Caer Sidi, the mound fort. Some texts say Caer Sidi is a burial mound, but another poem, Song Before the Sons of Llew, says this. It is surrounded by sea currents and has a flowing spring on top. This suggests that Caer Sidi is somewhere in the sea or sky. In Welsh, Sidid means the zodiac, which also points to the sky. It's similar to the Latin word sidus, which means star. Both words come from the ancient root swade, meaning to shine. Related words include xwaina in Avestan, Old Persian, meaning shining, and svidus in Lithuanian, meaning bright. So Caer Sidi might be a place among the stars. This idea is supported by more lines from Song Before the Sons of Llew. At the feasts of the giver, master astrologers received great gifts. Earlier in the poem, we also read, I freed my lord in the presence of the giver, the ruler of Elfin, who had high goals. This giver may be a version of a sky god, common in Indo-European myths. For example, in ancient Indian texts, the god Varuna is sometimes called Bhaga in Old Persian, which means both god and one who gives. So, in this poem, Caer Sidi may not just be a place in the world, it could be a divine home of wisdom, a kind of heaven. If Caer Sidi is both a place on earth and in the sky, then what does the journey in the spoils of Annwn really mean? In the beginning of the text, it was said that the Roman thinker Hippolytus connected the Druids with Pythagoras. This connection can help us understand the poem better by looking at the ideas of Pythagorean philosophy. We don't have any writings directly from Pythagoras himself. What we know comes from his students, especially Philolaus, and from philosophers like Aristotle. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Philolaus believed that everything in nature was made up of two opposite forces, limiters and the unlimited. The first thing that formed was a central fire, which he called the hearth of the universe, and all heavenly bodies moved around it. These opposites could only work together through harmony. He said, "Things that are different and unrelated can only be brought into order through harmony." Pythagoreans believed reality was based on 10 pairs of opposites, like limited, unlimited, and odd even. Their beliefs were also connected to a mystery religion called Orphism, which was said to come from the mythical poet Orpheus. We don't know much about Orphism, but some ancient texts have survived. One of them is a gold tablet found near Petelia in southern Italy. These tablets were placed around the necks of the dead to help guide their souls in the afterlife. One tablet says, "You will find a spring to the left of the house of Hades. Beside it stands a white cypress. Do not go near that spring. But further on, by the lake of memory, you'll find another spring. Cold water flows there, and guards stand before it. Say this, 'I am a child of earth and starry sky, but my race is of the heavens. You know this well. I am parched with thirst and dying. Let me drink from the cold water of memory.' Then they will allow you to drink from the sacred spring, and you will rule among the other blessed heroes." These lines make us think that the journey in the spoils of Annwn isn't about war, but a spiritual journey, a quest for wisdom and transformation. The castles in the poem are inner thresholds that the soul must cross. The cauldron is a symbol of deep, inner knowledge. And Arthur and his companions are not just going on an adventure, they're going through an initiation, a sacred journey toward understanding. If Caer Sidi belongs to both earth and sky, it may represent some of the opposites that the Pythagoreans talked about. This suggests that, like in the gold tablet from Petelia, the journey could lead to a kind of rebirth, either symbolic or real. We get another clue about Caer Sidi from a character called Gwyr, who is held prisoner there. Scholar John Coke suggests that Gwyr may be another name for Gwrai, the baby form of Pryderi, a character in the Mabinogion tales. Another researcher, Dan Merkur, connects this to a scene in another story where Pryderi gets stuck to a magical golden bowl in a castle. Merkur thinks this shows that Gwyr, like Pryderi, was captured by the very object he desired, in this case, the cauldron or bowl. Merkur suggests that this object may have held something like a mind-altering substance, something that gave visions or spiritual experiences. Interestingly, the poem later mentions mead, and some legends say the god Belinus was involved with such potions. So maybe Caer Sidi is a place where someone experiences both heaven and hell, a kind of altered state of mind or awareness. The second stop in the symbolic journey is Caer Pedriwen, meaning the four-peaked castle, or four-cornered castle. This castle might represent the sky itself, and may even be another form of Caer Sidi. But what makes this place important is the cauldron found there. It is heated by the breath of 9 maidens, mystical women who appear in British and Celtic myths as misty, magical figures. What do these maidens have to do with fire? One possible answer comes from Saint Bridget, an Irish saint who may be the Christian form of the Celtic goddess Brigantia. Brigantia was the protector of the Brigantes tribe in Britain. A medieval writer named Giraldus Cambrensis said that in the Irish town of Kildare, there was an eternal flame kept burning in Bridget's honor. 19 nuns took turns guarding the fire, and on the 20th night, Bridget herself was said to tend it. No men were allowed near, and the fire was never blown by mouth, only fanned. This is the opposite of the 9 maidens, who breathed directly onto the fire to heat the cauldron. Bridget was the goddess of poetry, prophecy, crafts, and wisdom, and Brigantia was later connected to Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. So the cauldron may symbolize inspiration, but only for the brave. The poem says, "It will not boil the food of a coward," meaning that true wisdom or inspiration only comes to those willing to face the journey of death and transformation. The four-cornered castle is the high point of the journey, and only those with courage can reach it. Up to this point, the poet maps out the journey, but the real journey begins at the next stop, Caer Vedwit, or Castle of Mead Drunkenness. This castle brings excitement, joy, maybe even a trance-like state. It brings the hero back to the threshold of wisdom, symbolized by the island with strong gates. There, water and black stone come together. Opposites become one. But next comes Caer Rigor, the Castle of Hardness. The word rigor can mean cold, stiffness, or tension, like the body or soul freezing after a powerful experience. This marks a new phase in the journey. At this point, the poet starts complaining again about the small men. Then comes Caer Widir, the Glass Castle. In this place, communication becomes difficult. The poet may be in a trance or unable to speak clearly, like a baby. Then comes Caer Golud. If this means castle of hindrance or obstacle castle, it means the journey has reached its hardest point. By the end of the poem, the poet's complaints about the little men become more intense. These little men seem to stand in the way of the poet finishing his symbolic journey. Still, the poet reaches the last 2 places, Caer Vandwi and Caer Ochran. We don't know for sure if the poet finishes his journey, but in the 7th and 8th parts of the poem, the way the monks are described, how they howl like a pack of dogs or gather like young wolves, along with the poet's sadness and sense of loss, suggest the journey might have failed. Both of these castles, like the earlier Castle of Hindrance, are high and hard to reach, either in the real world or in a symbolic sense. And if someone can get past them, it suggested that they could reach a higher spiritual realm. So even though the spoils of Annwn may look like a tale of warriors and battle, it's really a spiritual journey. It tells of a deep search for rebirth and inner truth, a quest that moves between darkness and light. But this journey fails, just like the soul of Gwair, who is trapped in the otherworld. The failure seems to come from the fact that ancient wisdom and the meanings behind old poems are no longer understood by the little men. These people can no longer understand the cauldron and what it represents. This poem might be the closest thing we have to a Druidic text, a blurry but powerful glimpse into a once great tradition that's now lost. And what about Arthur? He doesn't play a big role in the poem. That makes some scholars think he's not the main hero, but more of a spiritual guide. someone who helps others on their journey through the otherworld. Later in the book, Arthur will return, and we'll look at how he becomes a warrior king who helps the poet and others reach spiritual secrets. Was the poem's author a Druid? We may never know for sure. But the poem gives us clues. The most important one is that this is not a Christian poem. At the start and end, it mentions the Lord and Jesus, but the main tone feels much older and closer to ancient British beliefs. That suggests the poem was written in a time when Christianity was still spreading, but hadn't fully taken over yet. Christianity came to Britain slowly, over hundreds of years. The story of St. Alban, who was killed around 200 to 300 AD, shows that Christianity existed in Britain even before Emperor Constantine made it legal. After the Roman army left Britain, we don't know much about how the religion spread. But in the early 500s, a British monk named Gildas wrote a book called On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, where he scolded the leaders of his time for being sinful. This shows that Christian communities still existed then. Another important detail is the cauldron heated by the breath of 9 maidens. This may link to ancient beliefs in Gloucestershire, where people once worshipped hooded gods and triple mother goddesses. These goddesses were once seen as sacred, but over time, they were turned into witches or sorceresses in later stories. Gloucestershire was also one of the key areas where otherworld beliefs were strong. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, in 577 AD, towns like Corinium, Glevum, and Aquae Sulis were taken by the Saxons. The area soon became part of the Witchy Kingdom. A book written in 731 by Bede, called The Ecclesiastical History of the English People, does not explain how the Witchy people became Christians. That may be because they had already converted during Roman times. In fact, some Roman temples were turned into churches, like the one at Llew Llaw. Scholar Dorothy Watts also suggests that early churches may have been built in villas at Woodchester and Chedworth. Because of all this, it seems unlikely that the poet Taliesin came from Gloucestershire. Around 650 AD, only 2 British kingdoms remained free from Saxon control: Dumnonia and Erging. Taliesin may have lived in Erging, especially near Ariconium, which was famous for ironwork. But more likely, he lived in Gwent, a region built around the Roman town Venta Silurum, or the nearby fortress Isca Augusta. Christianity came to Gwent thanks to Saint Cadoc and Dubricius, who died in 612. However, most of Britain joined the wider Christian world only after Pope Gregory sent St. Augustine to convert King Ethelbert of Kent in 597. Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury, but he couldn't control the bishops in Wales or Dumnonia. The stories now known as the Mabinogion were written between 1060 and 1200. We'll focus mainly on the 4 main tales, called the 4 branches of the Mabinogi: Pwyll, prince of Dyfed Branwen, daughter of Lair Manawydan, son of Lair Math, son of Mathonwy. The word Mabinogi likely means the stories or teachings about the god Maponos. These 4 tales are not the only ones included. There are also native stories from old Celtic traditions. For example, there's Kulhuch and Olwin, which we already met, and Lud and Lephelis, which we'll explore later. The Mabinogion also includes 3 romance tales connected to King Arthur. One of them, called Peredur, son of Efraug, tells the story of 9 sorceresses from Gloucestershire. When we look at the 4 branches of the Mabinogi, we notice that only one character appears in all 4 stories: Pryderi, the son of Pwyll. Pryderi's mother Rhiannon appears in the first and third stories, and his friend Manawydan shows up in the second and third ones. Besides Pryderi and a few others, the stories seem mostly separate. To better understand them, we can divide the characters into 3 groups: the children of Lir, the children of Dawn, and a third, more mysterious group called the Mound People. Let's start with the first branch, called Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed. The story begins with 2 interesting facts. First, we don't know anything about Pwyll's family. No mother or father is mentioned. Second, his name is special. Pwyll means wisdom, mind, or sense. The word comes from Old Celtic and is related to other ancient words meaning to observe or to understand, like the Sanskrit word city or the Greek word tereo. The story begins with Pwyll going on a hunt with his dogs. During the hunt, he sees another pack of dogs attacking a deer. These strange dogs are shining white with red ears. Pwyll chases them away and lets his own dogs take the deer. Soon, the owner of the strange dogs appears. He is Annwn, the ruler of the otherworld, Annwn. Annwn is angry because Pwyll acted without respect. To make up for it, Pwyll agrees to switch places with Annwn for a year and a day and fight Annwn's enemy, Halfdan. After he returns, Pwyll gets the title Pwyll pen Annwn, meaning Pwyll, head of Annwn. At first, Annwn in this story seems like the same otherworld from the Spoils of Annwn poem, but here it is much softer and less dangerous, probably changed by Christian ideas. What happens after Pwyll comes back from Annwn is also important. At a feast, he climbs a special mound called Gorsedd Arberth, located in what is now Narberth in Wales. In the story, people say, "Whoever sits on this mound will either be wounded or see a miracle." While Pwyll and his men are sitting, a beautiful woman appears on a shining white horse. She wears a bright golden silk dress and moves slowly past the mound. Pwyll sends someone to find out who she is, but no matter how fast the man runs, he can't catch up. The next day, Pwyll himself rides after her, but he also can't catch her until he speaks to her. Then she stops. She tells him her name is Rhiannon. She is engaged to someone else, but she doesn't want to marry that man. She tells Pwyll to come to her father's palace in 1 year and rescue her. Many scholars believe Rhiannon is a version of the Celtic horse goddess Epona. She also represents sovereignty, the idea that a king must marry a goddess-like figure to rule properly. This idea is similar to the Irish story of Queen Medb. Later, we'll also see that Rhiannon has things in common with a Thracian horse god, whose horse also walks slowly and calmly. A year later, Pwyll goes to the palace and a feast is held. During the feast, a young man approaches and says he wants to marry a woman he loves. Pwyll agrees to grant his wish, without realizing the woman is Rhiannon. The young man's name is Gwawl, and he also asks for all the food and supplies in the hall. Rhiannon gives Pwyll a magic bag and tells him to meet her again in a year. At the next feast, Pwyll dresses as a beggar, with ragged clothes and rough shoes. After the meal, he asks Gwawl to fill his bag with food. But the bag is magical. It never gets full. Pwyll tricks Gwawl by asking him to step into the bag and press down the food. Once Gwawl steps in, Pwyll flips the bag and traps him inside. Soon after, Pwyll marries Rhiannon, the goddess of sovereignty and fertility. The magic bag connects Rhiannon with Epona, who is often shown holding a horn of plenty. Later in the story, Rhiannon gives birth to a baby boy. That night, some women are told to watch over the baby, but they fall asleep. When they wake up, the baby is gone. To avoid punishment, they kill a puppy and smear its blood on Rhiannon, then accuse her of murdering her own child. Rhiannon's punishment is symbolic. Every day she must sit by a stone step near the palace gate and tell everyone what happened. She must also offer to carry travelers on her back, like a horse. Meanwhile, in another place, a ruler named Tairnan Treif Liant hears a strange sound one night while watching over his prized mare. When he returns, he finds a baby wrapped in silk. He and his wife raise the baby and name him Gree Golden Hair. As the boy grows, they realize he must be the missing son of Pwyll and Rhiannon. They return him to his real parents, and his name is changed to Pryderi, which is often translated as worry or concern. Pryderi, like his mother Rhiannon, is connected to horses. He is also linked to Mabon, a figure from the Mabinogion. Mabon was stolen from his mother when he was only 3 nights old. Pryderi's first name, Gree, helps us connect him to Gwair, a captive mentioned in the poem The Spoils of Annwn. Through his wife Tsigfa, he is also linked to Gloucester. His final name, Pryderi, is unusual. Most people think it comes from the Welsh word pryder, meaning worry. But scholar Ifor Williams suggests it may come from the Old Breton word pryteri, meaning lost. This fits the story better. Another interesting idea comes from Czech folklorist Joseph Baudis. He connects the name Pryderi to an old Indo-European root qrt, which gives words in Irish, Welsh, and the old name for Britain, Prydain. That makes Pryderi more than a story character. He becomes a cultural archetype. This story focuses on the children of Llŷr, including his son Bran, his daughter Branwen, his son Manawydan, and half-brothers Nisian and Efnisian. Their mother is Penardun, daughter of Bailey Mór. Nisian and Efnisian share a different father, Euroswyd. The story opens by saying Bran is king of Britain and is crowned in London. Llŷr's name comes from a Celtic root meaning sea, making his children symbolically the children of the sea. One day, while sitting by the sea at Harlech, Bran and his men spot a fleet of ships. The leader is the Irish king Matholwch, who wants to marry Branwen. They hold a big feast on Anglesey at Aberfraw, and that night, Matholwch and Branwen are together. Next morning, Efnisian sees Matholwch's horses and finds out they came with his sister. He's furious because he feels his sister was married without their permission. So he cruelly maims the horses. Since horses are royal symbols, this is a serious insult. Furious, Matholwch leaves. Bran hears about it and offers new horses and a silver staff to make peace. This convinces Matholwch to return. During the feast, Bran gives Matholwch a special gift, the Cauldron of Rebirth, which was featured in The Spoils of Annwn. Bran explains it came from Lasar and his wife Timide in Ireland. Matholwch tells his side. One day on a hill above Cauldron Lake, they saw a giant carrying the cauldron with a large woman. He takes them back to Wales, but they begin to hurt people and give birth to warrior children every 3 months. The people build an iron house, heat it with coals, and trap them inside. But the couple escapes and takes the cauldron back to Wales. This story is important because the iron house breaks the old cauldron motif. Folklorist Ustin says it's like a twisted cauldron. Instead of rebirth, it kills people. So here, the symbol is corrupted. Later, Matholwch goes back to Ireland with Branwen, and she gives birth to a son. But soon the Irish mock Matholwch's marriage. Angry, he punishes Branwen and forces her to cook in the palace. Branwen raises a starling bird, ties a letter to its leg, and sends it to her brother Bran in Wales. Bran gathers his men and travels to Ireland. He is so big he crosses the sea on foot, carrying musicians on his shoulders. At first, the Irish make peace. They give the throne to Branwen's son, Gwern, and build a giant house for Bran. But it's a trap. Inside 100 columns are hidden warriors. That sets the stage for the next part of the story. Efnisian arrives at the house before anyone else and asks what's inside the leather bags. Someone answers, flour. But Efnisien checks each bag with his hands and crushes the skulls of the men hiding inside. When Bran and the others arrive and sit at the table, peace talks begin. Bran and Manawydan speak with their young relative Gwern. Gwern goes up to Efnisien, but suddenly Efnisien grabs him and throws him into the fire. Branwen screams and tries to run to her son, but Bran stops her. The Irish then bring out the Cauldron of Rebirth and start throwing their dead soldiers into it, bringing them back to life. Efnisien sneaks into the group of dead Irish, climbs into the cauldron, stretches his body inside it, and breaks it into 4 pieces, destroying it. In the end, the Britons win the war, but at a huge cost. As mentioned earlier, only 7 people survive. Among them are Manawydan, Pryderi, and Taliesin. Bran is wounded in the foot by a poisoned spear. Before he dies, he tells the survivors to cut off his head and bury it on White Hill in London. But he also says the journey will be long. First, they will feast at Harlech for 7 years, comforted by the songs of Rhiannon's birds. Then they must go to the island of Gwales and stay there for 80 years. During this time, Bran's head will not rot and will keep speaking, as if he were still alive. When they reach the coast of Wales, they learn that Caswallon, son of Beli, has taken control of Britain and is now king in London. So they go to Harlech and begin their 7-year feast. As soon as they take their first bite of food, 3 birds appear in the sky and sing so beautifully that no other sound matters. These are likely the magical birds of Rhiannon. After the 7 years, they move to Gwales. There, they forget all their pain and sadness. But one day, one of the 7 survivors opens a door that faces Cornwall, a door that should never be opened. This breaks the magic, and they are forced to leave the island. Eventually, they reach London and bury Bran's head on White Hill, fulfilling his last wish. Beli, who is also the father of Bran and Manawydan's mother, Penarden, is considered an ancient ancestor in Welsh legends. In the story Lud and Lephelis, Beli has 2 sons, Lud and Caswallon. The idea that Beli is the father of Cassivelaunus, who fought Julius Caesar, likely comes from a mistake in the medieval text, Historia Brittonum. In that text, a British king is called Belinus, son of Minocanus, but this may have originally meant Adminius, son of Cunobelinus, king of the Britons. Scholar Koch suggests the name Beli might come from a Celtic warrior named Bolgios or Belgius, who once fought the Greeks and Macedonians. Over time, the name became linked to the Belgi, a group from northern Gaul, who later migrated to southern Britain. Locals may have seen them as a people from across the sea. This might explain why Bran and Manawydan are called the Children of the Sea. The Celtic migration to Britain likely happened between 450 and 200 BC. During that time, warriors like Brennus and Bolgios led campaigns in Greece and Macedonia. Around 100 BC, the Belgae settled in southeast Britain. The people already living there probably saw them as sea people. Interestingly, in the old Welsh triads, Lir is called half-tongue Lir. This might mean that the language of these sea people was only partly understood. Today, parts of Walloon and Flemish spoken in Belgium share sounds with Welsh, hinting at a deeper connection between the Belgi's language and early British speech. The third branch of the Mabinogion is called Manawydan, son of Lir. It begins right after the events of the second branch. It starts with Manawydan and Pryderi burying Bran's head on White Hill in London. Manawydan doesn't want to live under Caswallon's rule, so Pryderi offers him rule over Dyfed's 7 districts and also to marry his mother, Rhiannon. Manawydan accepts and becomes ruler of Dyfed. He marries Rhiannon. One day, Pryderi and his wife, Sigfa, and Manawydan and Rhiannon hold a feast at Arberth. Afterwards, they all climb the Gorsedd Hill, like in Pwyl's story. A courtier warns them that anyone who sits on the hill may be hurt or witness a miracle. Sure enough, while they sit there, a loud thunder strikes, and a thick mist covers everything. When the light returns, all signs of life are gone. The people, animals, and smoke from houses all disappear. Only ruined buildings remain. Everyone is gone, except for the 4 of them. The group travels across the land but finds no one. For a year, they survive by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Tired of this, they go to England, where they begin making saddles. Manawydan adds blue paint and decorations, making them the best saddles anyone had seen. Their work is so good that other saddle makers become jealous and threaten to kill them. So they move to another town and start making shields. The same thing happens. Local craftsmen threaten them. Then they try shoemaking, but again face threats. They return to Dyfed, go back to Arberth, and live by hunting again. One morning, Manawydan and Pryderi go hunting. Their dogs run into a small forest but quickly return, scared. When they follow them, they see a shining white wild boar. They chase the boar, and it leads them to a large castle they had never seen before. The dogs and the boar enter the castle. Manawydan warns Pryderi not to go in, but Pryderi follows anyway. Inside, Pryderi sees only a marble fountain and a golden bowl hanging from 4 chains. The beauty of the bowl amazes him. When he touches it, his hands stick to the bowl and his feet to the floor. He can't move or speak anymore. Manawydan tells Rhiannon what happened. She enters the castle and also gets stuck to the bowl in the same way. Then, thunder sounds, a mist falls, and the castle disappears, with Rhiannon and Pryderi inside it. Later, Manawydan and Sigfa go back to England. Manawydan starts making shoes again, but just like before, local workers become jealous of his skills and force him to stop, so they return to Dyfed. This time, Manawydan brings some wheat seeds with him. He plants wheat in 3 different fields, and the crops grow very well. But when it's time to harvest, he finds that the first 2 fields have been completely ruined. He stays up at night to protect the 3rd field. Then he sees that the thieves are mice. One of the mice is bigger and slower than the others, so he catches it and decides to hang it. Just then, a bishop arrives and offers him money to free the mouse. But the bishop is actually a magician named Llewyd Til Coed. Llewyd had put a curse on Dyfed to take revenge for what happened to Gaul in the first branch of the story. The mouse Manawydan caught is actually Llewyd's wife. When he agrees to let her go, the spell is broken, and Rhiannon and Pryderi are freed. Just like in the first branch, everything starts at Gorsedd Hill in Arberth. That's where the magic begins. The most important part of this 3rd branch is when Pryderi and Rhiannon are trapped in the magical castle by the Golden Bowl. This scene is very similar to the story of Gwyr, who was trapped in Annwn. The name Llewyd Til Coed means Grey Man of the Forest Cell. Some think it comes from an Irish story where a man named Liath MacSeltchair loves a woman named Bree, but her father Midir won't let them be together. Bree dies of heartbreak. If Llewyd is related to this character, then he is one of the fairy folk, or magical beings of the hills. The 4th branch is called Math, son of Mathonwy. It focuses on the children of Dawn, Arianrhod, Gwydion, and Gylfaethwy, as well as Dawn's brother Math and Arianrhod's son Llew. At this time, Math is king of Gwynedd, and Pryderi rules the 21 cantrefs of the south. To understand this story, we must begin with Dawn. Dawn is often compared to Danu, the mother of gods in Irish myths. Some say Danu's name comes from an ancient word that means flowing water. But scholar Koch, following Carey, sees this story as a creation myth and says Dawn's name might come from a word meaning ground or earth, similar to words in Old Irish and Greek. Math has a strange weakness. Except during war, he can only survive by resting his feet on the lap of a virgin girl. At the time, that girl is Gawain. But Gylfethwy is in love with her and can't tell anyone because Math has a special power. He can hear every whisper people say, even if the wind carries it. Gylfethwy's brother Gwydion sees what's going on and offers to help. He tells Math that Pryderi has a new type of animal, pigs, which came from the otherworld, and says he can go get them. Gwydion and Gylfethwy dress up as bards and visit Pryderi's court. Gwydion's storytelling charms everyone. He asks for the pigs, but Pryderi says they can't be given away until they double in number. So Gwydion uses magic to create 12 dogs, 12 horses, and 12 golden shields. Pryderi agrees to trade the pigs for these magical gifts, and the brothers quickly leave, since the magic only lasts for one day. As expected, Pryderi soon finds out he was tricked and declares war. Math leads his army to battle. During this time, Gylfethwy enters Math's room, puts Gawain to sleep, and rapes her. Meanwhile, Math's and Pryderi's armies fight and suffer heavy losses. In the end, they agree to settle the conflict with single combat. Gwydion, the one who caused the war, will fight Pryderi. Using strength, courage, and magic, Gwydion wins, and Pryderi dies. When Math returns, he learns what happened to Gawain. He punishes Gwydion and Gylfethwy in a very unusual way. Since you acted together, you will live together and mate with each other. You will take the form of animals and give birth like they do. Come back to me after 1 year. Exactly 1 year later, loud noises are heard under the castle walls, and the dogs start barking. Math asks what's happening. A servant looks outside and replies, "My lord, there is a stag, a doe, and a strong young animal with them." Math goes outside and sees a buck, a doe, and their fawn. The same magical punishment was repeated twice more, once every year. First, a female deer was turned into a wild boar, and a male deer into a female pig. The next year, the female pig became a female wolf, and the wild boar became a male again. At the end of the third year, they were all turned back into humans. Math no longer had a virgin to rest his feet on, so Gwydion suggested his own sister, Arianrhod. Arianrhod was the daughter of Dawn, who was also Math's sister. But Math wanted to be sure Arianrhod was truly a virgin, so he asked her to step over his magical wand. When she did, she gave birth to a big boy with curly golden hair. Soon after, a second, smaller thing was born. Gwydion picked it up, wrapped it in silk, and hid it in a chest at the foot of his bed. The big boy was named Dylan and ran straight into the sea. Later, Gwydion heard crying from the chest. When he opened it, he found a small baby boy. He gave the baby to a nurse, and the child quickly grew strong, just like Pryderi in the first branch. Gwydion became like a father to the child. One day, he took him to Caer Arianrhod, where his mother lived. At first, Arianrhod welcomed them, but when she realized the boy was her son, she became angry. When she learned he had no name, she swore, "He will not have a name unless I give it to him." To break this curse, Gwydion made a ship and disguised himself and the boy as shoemakers. They went to Caer Arianrhod. Arianrhod ordered shoes, but Gwydion made them too big on purpose. When she came to complain, the boy shot a bird that landed on the ship. A thrush landed on the boat. The boy aimed and hit it exactly between the bone and the tendon. Arianrhod laughed and said, "By God, he is beautiful and skilled with his hand." Gwydion quickly answered, "And so he has a name now. From this day on, he will be called Llew Llaw Gyffes, Llew of the Skillful Hand. Once she realized who they were, Arianrhod made another curse. He will not bear arms unless I give them to him. To break this curse, Gwydion and Llew disguised themselves as bards and returned to Caer Arianrhod. After spending the night there, Gwydion made a magical illusion of an army attacking. Arianrhod panicked and gave Llew all the weapons he needed. Then Gwydion made the fake army disappear. Now furious, Arianrhod made a third curse. No woman of this world will ever be his wife. To defeat this final curse, Math and Gwydion decided to create a wife for him using magic. They gathered flowers, oak, broom, and meadowsweet, and made the most beautiful woman they had ever seen. They named her Blodwed, which means flower face. Llew married her. But when Llew left to visit Math, Blodwed fell in love with a nobleman named Gronv, who passed by. Together they planned to kill Llew. One day, pretending to be worried, Blodwed asked how Llew could be killed. He said it was nearly impossible. He could only die under strange conditions, standing in a bath by a river, with one foot on the edge of the tub and the other on a young stag's back, and only with a special spear. Blodwed pretended not to understand and asked him to show her. A scene was set by the river, but they accidentally brought goats instead of a stag. When Llew stood in position, Gronv threw the magic spear and struck him. Llew screamed in pain, turned into an eagle, and flew away. When Gwydion heard what happened, he went looking for him. One day, he followed a female pig that was eating rotten flesh and worms under a tree. He looked up and saw an eagle sitting in the tree. Every time the eagle shook its feathers, bits of rotten meat fell. Gwydion knew this was Llew, and began to speak 3 short poems, called Englinion. A tree grows between 2 lakes. Its black branches stretch high and low. If I'm not mistaken, this tree came from Llew's flowers. The eagle moved a bit lower. On a high plain stands a tree. Rain doesn't touch it. No drop falls. Struck 90 times by waves. Llew Llaw Giffes is at the top. The eagle came down to the lowest branch. On a steep slope stands a tree, a holy place for a noble lord. If I'm right, Llew will come down to my lap. Then the eagle landed on his lap. Gwydion touched him with his magic wand and turned him back into a man. But Llew was in terrible shape, just skin and bones. Afterward, Llew recovered. Gwydion turned Blodwed into an owl. Llew threw a spear at Gronw in return, just like the one Gronw had used. It broke Gronw's back and killed him. At the beginning of this story, we see Gwydion kill Pryderi in single combat. This may symbolize the children of the earth taking the place of the mound people. Also, the children of the sea do not appear in this tale, except perhaps in 2 cases. 1. Arianrhod is said to be the daughter of Beli Mor in a list called the Triads. 2nd, Llew is named as one of the 3 golden shoemakers, along with Caswallon and Manawydan. Now, about the name Math, French historian Henri Darbois de Jubainville said that the word might come from the Irish word Math Gamhuin, meaning bear cub, which was used in Bible translations for the Hebrew word daub, bear. This root also appears in Gaulish male names like Matu Janos, son of the bear, or Matu Murus, big as a bear. There were even bear gods named Matunus or Matunos, and place names like Ande Matunum, meaning fortress of the great bear. In Ireland, there's a name Mac Mathgamna, meaning son of the bear cub. Some scholars, like Bokhorn, say this group may include the wizard Math ap Mathonwy from this story, and Math Mac Umoir from Irish myth. We don't know exactly how Math is linked to the bear, but he is clearly a wizard or druid. In fact, in one triad list, it says Math taught Gwydion one of the 3 greatest magical spells in Britain. According to Koch, In an old Welsh manuscript called Harleian 3859, there is a family tree from the kingdom of Brycheiniog, where a person called Old Llew is described as the son of Gwydion. If this is true, it suggests two things. 1. Gwydion might actually be Llew's real father, which would explain why Arianrhod, Llew's mother, is so angry with both her son and Gwydion. 2. Gwydion's name may come from Widu Genos, which means son of the tree. Arianrhod's name is usually translated as silver wheel and is connected to the moon, just like Llew's name is linked to light. The Welsh scholar John Rhys believed that Caer Arianrhod referred to the Corona Borealis constellation. Llew is often compared to the Irish god Lugus. His nickname, Skilled Hand, is very similar to the Irish god Llugh's nickname, Lamfada. Llew was also linked to shoemaking. In fact, in Roman Spain, a guild of shoemakers dedicated a stone inscription to him. Also, the name of Llew's home, Dinas Dinle, shares meaning with the city name Lugdunum in Gaul, just written in reverse. These links may seem weak, but they become stronger as we look deeper into the story. Some scholars say that the tale of Math Api Mathonwy is a kind of creation myth. One reason for this is the idea that Llew may have been born from an incestuous relationship. Elizabeth Archibald points out that in Greek mythology, Kronos married his sister Rhea, and their son Zeus later overthrew him. In Egyptian mythology, both Osiris and Seth married their sisters. So in many early creation stories, sibling relationships were considered natural or even necessary. In Norse mythology, Njord's children, Freyr and Freya, were also born from his sister, and there's no shame shown about it. If this is a creation myth, then Gwydion and Math are the active forces of creation. Both are Druids. They created Blodeued from flowers, especially oak blossoms. When Llew turned into an eagle, he perched on top of an oak tree. Math carries a magical staff, and both characters can perform spells. According to ancient Greek and Roman writers, Druids studied the stars. This tradition might survive in Welsh myths. Rhys believed that not only Caer Arianrhod, but also Dawn's Palace and Caer Gwydion represented star constellations, Cassiopeia and the Milky Way, for example. Ancient sources also say Druids believed in reincarnation. In this story, shapeshifting is common. Math turns Gwydion and Gylfethwy into animals, and Llew becomes an eagle. These types of transformations appear often in poems linked to the bard Taliesin. In one poem called The Painful Bond, translated by Sarah Higley, the speaker says, "I was a blue salmon, a dog, a deer, a mountain goat, a tree trunk, a shovel, a drinking horn in the hand, a nail in a clamp. For a year and a half I was a white-spotted rooster among hens in Edinburgh, a horse in the herd, an angry bull, a miller's billy goat. I was a grain of wheat grown on a slope. I was cut, thrown in the chimney, and carried in a sack. A red-clawed hen picked me up, and I lay in her belly 9 nights as a child." Another poem from the Book of Taliesin called Cat Godu, The Battle of the Trees, continues the same theme. "I have been many forms before I took a steady shape. I was a narrow, colored sword. I was the faintest star. I was a word among letters, a book at the beginning. I was the light of lanterns for a year and a half. I was a constant bridge over more than 60 rivers. I was a road, I was an eagle, a canoe on the sea, calm at a feast, a raindrop in the storm, a sword in the hand, a shield in war." It's not always clear what these transformations mean. Some may represent reincarnation, some shape-shifting, and some might just show a poetic connection to nature and culture. Looking for the mound people and children of the earth. If we want to learn more about the mysterious ancient groups known as the Mound People and the Children of the Earth, one of the best places to study is southern England. More specifically, the area southwest of London, from the Marlborough Downs and the Kennet Valley in the north of Wiltshire, down through the Pewsey Valley to Salisbury Plain in the south, and eastward into western Hampshire. These people left deep marks on the land. West Kennet Long Barrow, the Avebury Stone Circle, Silbury Hill, and most famously, Stonehenge. Let's focus on 3 monuments. West Kennet Long Barrow, clearly a burial mound or seed yam. Silbury Hill, which legend says is the grave of King Sil. Stonehenge, which the medieval writer Geoffrey of Monmouth claimed was built in memory of 460 Britons murdered by the Saxon king Hengist. He called it the Dance of the Giants. West Kennet Long Barrow is a Neolithic burial site built on chalk hills near Silbury Hill. It's about 2.5 kilometers south of Avebury. Archaeologists say it's a type of tomb known as Severn Cotswold. It has 2 side chambers and 1 main burial chamber at one end. The barrow is about 100 meters long. It took around 15,700 hours of labor to build. At the entrance, there's a curved courtyard and a front made from large sarsen stones. It was built around 3,600 BC and used until around 2,500 BC. According to Julian Thomas, the first burials at West Kennet Long Barrow included both whole bodies and bones. It seems that bodies were sometimes removed and then placed back later. The tombs were visited many times over the years, not for ordinary reasons, but for important rituals. Only a small number of people could be inside the tombs at a time, which suggests that these visits were private and sacred. In fact, in the west chamber, most of the bones belonged to adult men, while in the southeast chamber, they were mostly from younger individuals. Later, new layers were added to the tombs. These layers were made of white chalk and darker burnt material that contained organic matter. In the dark layers, archaeologists found many broken pots, stone tools, and bones from both humans and animals. Piggott, one of the archaeologists who studied the tomb, said that these items came from different cultural styles, including grooved ware and beaker pottery. He believed they were not placed in the tomb all at once, but collected over time, maybe first kept in another sacred place, like a house for offerings. These objects, like the bodies, were likely part of symbolic rituals. Bodies decayed and were rearranged, and pots were broken on purpose and spread around the tomb. Around 2500 BCE, people from the beaker culture filled the tomb's entrance and chambers completely with stone and earth, covering even the ritual layers. Historian Barry Cunliffe explains that the beaker people did not take over this area quickly. At first, they avoided the old sacred places, which shows that their beliefs were different. But over time, they started using these sites too, which means they slowly took over religious and social power. Covering the West Kennet tomb with large stones may have been their way of showing they were now in control. Silbury Hill stands where the Kennet River Valley meets a stream and a natural spring. It's built on white chalk from the Cretaceous period and is part of a large chalk plain that stretches north to Swindon. The origin of the name Silbury is unclear, but historian David Field says the oldest known name is Celeburg, which might come from the Old English word for hall or great house. According to Wikipedia, Silbury Hill is the tallest man-made prehistoric mound in Europe and one of the largest in the world. It's estimated that the hill took about 18 million hours of work to build, around 500 people working for 15 years, piling up over 8.8 million cubic feet of earth and material. Between 1968 and 1970, archaeologist Richard Atkinson led excavations, and suggested the hill was built in several stages. First, a small mound of grass and gravel was made. Then, a ditch was dug around it, and a second layer of chalk was added. Finally, the huge chalk mound we see today was completed. Atkinson described the hill as being like a layered wedding cake, though these layers became invisible over time due to weather. He believed the hill was built during the Neolithic period, and in 2001, this was confirmed by archaeologist Factina McAvoy. A tool made from deer antler found at the top of the hill was dated to around 2490 to 2340 BCE, proving it was built in the late Neolithic period. Atkinson's theory of layered construction has been questioned. Recent studies by English Heritage showed that if someone walks around the upper terrace, they end up several meters lower than where they started. This means the hill might have had a spiral path going down around it. Even though lower terraces have eroded, the spiral idea suggests that the path could have been used for rituals or during construction. We still don't know exactly why Silbury Hill was built. Interestingly, more Roman and early medieval items have been found at the site than Neolithic ones. In the 1800s, a large Roman structure was found south of the hill. In 1867, ashes and Roman-British artifacts were found near the base. Atkinson found over 100 Roman coins in the surrounding ditch, as well as Roman wells and tunnels nearby. In recent years, pipe construction and aerial photography have revealed a large Roman settlement at the base of nearby Weydon Hill. This makes it hard to believe Silbury Hill was ignored during Roman times. David Field suggests that in the past, the hill's surface may have been covered with graves, monuments, or memorials, and that what we've found so far might only be a small part of what once existed. Atkinson also found items from the early Middle Ages, including iron nails, pottery from around the 1000s, a silver coin from the time of King Ethelred II, and an iron spearhead. He believed these might be linked to a Viking raid in East Kennet in 1006, and that the terraces of the hill were fortified for defense. However, since the post holes were inside the terraces, it's more likely they were used to support outer walls rather than for defense. Field thinks that in the early medieval period, Silbury Hill may have had an important building on top, maybe even a Christian one. If it was seen as holy during Roman times, this sacred meaning may have continued into the Middle Ages. The name Celeburg, meaning hall fortress, may have come from this important structure. The ditch around the hill was once thought to be just a quarry used to get building materials, but its round shape and the straight extension on the west side suggest it also had symbolic or ritual meaning. Archaeologists now believe that such ditches were not just practical, but also spiritual, perhaps to keep evil spirits away. If the rectangular area was filled with water, it might have been used for rituals, like a sacred pool. The surface of water often symbolized a mirror or a gateway in ancient religions. In shamanism, mirrors often represent spiritual power, which supports this idea. While Silbury Hill was being built, about 30 kilometers to the south on Salisbury Plain, Stonehenge was also under construction. Stonehenge's history goes far back. According to Wikipedia, archaeologists found 4 or 5 large holes under the car park near Stonehenge, dating back to 8000 BCE. These holes were from the Mesolithic period and may have held large wooden posts. At least 3 of the posts were lined up east to west, which suggests some kind of religious or ritual purpose. No other similar sites are known in Britain from that time, but there are similar ones in Scandinavia. The earliest part of Stonehenge dates to around 3100 BC. The first structure was a large circular ditch with a raised bank, about 110 meters wide. There were 2 entrances, one large in the northeast and a smaller one in the south. When the ditch was dug, people buried deer and ox bones, along with some flint tools. Interestingly, these bones were older than the antlers used to dig the ditch. This means the bones were kept for a long time before being buried. In the outer circle, there are 56 holes known as the Aubrey holes, named after John Aubrey, who first recorded them in the 1600s. Over the next 200 years, at least 25 of these holes were used for cremation burials. A team from the University of Sheffield, led by Mike Parker Pearson, used carbon dating on some of these remains. For example, the cremated bones in Aubrey Hole 32 came from someone who died between 3030 and 2880 BC. Another person buried in the middle of the ditch died between 2930 and 2870 BC. Skulls from the ditch's north and east sides date between 2890 and 2570 BC. The ditch was dug again between 2570 and 2340 BC, and a third cremation was added on the north side. All of this shows that Stonehenge was used as a cemetery from the very beginning until the time when the large sarsen stones were set up between 2655 and 2485 BC. According to Parker Pearson, about 240 people were buried there over several centuries, roughly one burial every 2 years. This suggests that the site was used by a royal or elite family. The famous stone part of Stonehenge was likely built around 2600 BC. At that time, workers dug 2 circles of holes in the center and placed up to 80 standing stones, though today only 43 remain. Some stones, made of volcanic rock called dolerite, may have been brought from the Preseli Hills in Wales, but another theory says glaciers may have moved these stones closer to the area long ago. Between 2600 and 2400 BC, builders brought in 30 massive sarsen stones, likely from quarries in the Marlborough Downs. These stones were carefully shaped and joined using peg and socket techniques, like giant wooden furniture. A circle of 30 standing stones was formed, with 30 horizontal stones placed on top. Inside this ring, 5 giant stone structures called trilithons were arranged in a horseshoe shape, with the open end facing northeast. Later, the blue stones were moved again and placed inside the sarsen circle. Some of them were carved, possibly for linking them together. Like the sarsens, these stones had wooden-style joinery, which suggests they may have supported some kind of roof or structure. Between 2280 and 1930 BC, the blue stones were rearranged again, this time into an oval and then into a horseshoe. The last known construction at Stonehenge happened around 1600 BC, when 2 new rings of holes called the Y and Z holes were dug around the sarsen circle. We don't know much about the people who first raised the blue stones and sarsens, but we know more about those who worked on later parts of the site, thanks to discoveries like the Amesbury Archer and the Boscombe Bowman. In 2002, archaeologists found a burial site 5 kilometers southeast of Stonehenge. The grave dates to around 2300 BC and is the richest Bronze Age burial ever found in Britain. It contained about 100 items: the man's full skeleton, 3 copper knives, 2 gold hair ornaments, 2 stone wrist guards, 16 flint arrowheads, and 5 beaker pottery vessels. The gold items are dated to around 2470 BC, making them the oldest gold objects found in Britain. These treasures were likely buried with the man so he could use them in the afterlife. Tests on his teeth showed that he grew up in Central Europe, probably in the Alps region. However, it's unclear when exactly he moved to Britain. In 2003, during a water pipe construction near Boscombe Down, archaeologists found another grave. It dated to around 2300 BCE and contained remains from 7 people: 3 adult men, 1 teenage boy, and 3 children. It's the largest number of people found in a single beaker grave in Britain. The grave also had 8 beaker pots, 7 of them beautifully decorated, with 6 made using rope patterns, and 1 with a rare woven pattern also seen in the Amesbury Archer's grave. Other finds included 5 arrowheads, flint tools, a wild boar tooth, and a bone toggle. These toggles are common in Europe, but rare in Britain. Only 1 other has been found here. They might have been used as jewelry, clothing fasteners, or hair ornaments. Teeth tests showed that the Boscombe bowmen probably came from northwest England, or possibly North or South Wales. This means they may have been locals who adopted beaker traditions, even though they had cultural ties to the European mainland. The beaker culture spread across Europe between 2800 and 1900 BC. It started in Germany and moved west to the Netherlands, France, Spain, Portugal, Britain, and Ireland. Barry Cunliffe says this spread happened after 3000 BC, when traditional Northern European societies began to break down and more mobile lifestyles appeared. The culture gets its name from bell-shaped drinking cups, decorated with horizontal lines. These cups were often placed in round barrows, alongside weapons, in individual male graves. Pollen found in some of the pots shows they were used for drinking a kind of honey wine flavored with herbs. One of these herbs, meadowsweet, is the same flower used in the Welsh legend Mabinogion to create the character Blodeuwedd. So who were the beaker people? Some were immigrants from the Alps, like the Amesbury Archer. Others were local Britons who adopted the culture. These people were responsible for sealing West Kennet Long Barrow with giant stones, and possibly for rebuilding parts of Stonehenge around 2000 BC. During all these massive construction projects, where did the workers live? The answer may lie at Durrington Walls, a Neolithic village and ceremonial site about 3 kilometers northeast of Stonehenge. Around 2600 BC, a huge wooden circle called the Southern Circle was built at Durrington Walls. It was aligned with the sunrise during the winter solstice. The post holes were arranged in 4 large concentric circles and likely held enormous upright timbers. About 200 years later, 2 more wooden circles were added, and a large henge was built around them. A deep ditch, about 5.5 meters, was dug, and the soil was piled up to create a raised circular wall 30 meters wide and several meters high. Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson believes that Durrington Walls and Stonehenge were connected and meant to work together. Both are aligned with the movements of the sun during the solstices, which supports this idea. According to Pearson, the wooden circle at Durrington Walls represented life and the world of the living, while Stonehenge, with its stone circles and nearby burial mounds, represented the world of the dead. These 2 sacred places were linked by the River Avon and the roads around it. The path between them was likely used in rituals to symbolize the journey from life to death. Durrington Walls wasn't just a religious site. It was also a real village. It had a large circular shape with hundreds of homes. Its outer boundary was about 1.5 kilometers long, and it might have been the biggest Neolithic village in northwest Europe. Excavations between 2004 and 2007 showed that there was about 1 house every 40 square meters. This means there could have been over 300 houses inside the circular enclosure. Studies of the environment show that Durrington Walls was probably only used at certain times of the year. The lack of burnt grains or grinding stones, the absence of newborn animal bones, and the fact that pigs were mostly killed in midwinter suggest that people came here only during special times, bringing already prepared food and animals. The Amesbury Archer and the Boscombe Bowman tell us a lot about Stonehenge around 2300 BC. But for later times, another important place to study is the Normanton Down Barrows. According to English Heritage, this group of burial mounds dates from 2600 to 1600 BC and is one of the most impressive cemeteries near Stonehenge. It's located just south of Stonehenge, only about 1 kilometer away, and includes many different Bronze Age round barrows. There is also an earlier Neolithic long barrow. The first ritual use of this area likely began between 3400 and 3000 BC with the long barrow. Nearby, there was a special open-air area for preparing bodies. The dead were left there so the wind and birds could clean the bones. This process is called excarnation, removing the flesh before burial. Researchers Stuart Needham, Andrew Lawson, and Anne Woodward believe the Normanton Down Cemetery fits into the early stages of what Needham calls the 5 phases of the British Bronze Age. The earliest beaker burials didn't include barrows and may still be hidden. But we do know that many of these early graves were placed near older, long or oval mounds, especially in the western part of the area. Later, beaker burials followed the same pattern, and some were eventually covered with barrows, making them easier for archaeologists to find. During the 3rd phase of the Bronze Age, there was a major change in how burials were arranged. This period is named after the bush barrow, which will be discussed in more detail below. From this time on, we see 3 main types of burial sites. The most striking is the linear barrow cemetery at Normanton. 2 graves there had both daggers and belt buckles, showing wealth and high status. In the 4th phase, which includes a special type of dagger called the Camerton Snowshill dagger, burial locations start to look very different. But the biggest change happens during the Middle Bronze Age. By then, many large round barrows from earlier times were already present. Now, smaller barrow clusters began to appear, linked with Deverell Rimbury pottery, a clear sign of Middle Bronze Age burials. Only one of these new clusters is near the old Big Barrows. It's close to a group called the Lake Barrows. Meanwhile, Normanton Down seems to have been mostly abandoned. Attention shifted to farmland farther west, which was enclosed by fences. There, archaeologists found signs of homes and a deep pit known as the Wilsford Shaft, which may have been a well or a sacred pit. The most famous grave in Normanton Down is the Bush Barrow, dated between 1900 and 1700 BC. It was excavated in 1808 by Sir Richard Colt Hoare and William Cunnington. According to James Dyer, at the bottom of the barrow was the skeleton of a tall, strong man, possibly a local chief from the Wessex area. A wooden shield with bronze decorations lay at his head. A bronze axe was wrapped at his shoulder, and 2 bronze daggers were placed beside him. One dagger had a wooden handle decorated with thousands of tiny gold pins. Near his right hand was a smaller dagger. By his leg was a curious stone with holes, a fossilized tubularia used as the head of a mace. It was attached to a wooden shaft decorated with bone rings. The man's clothes didn't survive, but some of the jewelry sewn onto them remained. A gold plate about 18 centimeters long was found on his chest, and a finely patterned gold belt buckle was on his waist. Researcher Mike Pitts made an interesting point. 3 large metal daggers and a bronze axe were found in the grave. While daggers are common in barrows, axes are rare. The rich culture that built Bush Barrow wasn't isolated from Europe. Amber beads found in Normanton Down may have come from the Baltic Sea region, and faience beads could have come from other parts of Europe, or even the Mediterranean. These luxury items were likely traded for tin from Cornwall, which was essential for making bronze. Researcher Harding believes that the style of amber beads suggests direct connections between southern England and Greece. In both Wessex and Mycenae, very similar amber plaques have been found. Siama and Eicher even say that a gold-framed amber disc found at Knossos is almost identical to one found in Wessex. They suggest the same goldsmith may have made both. This shows that when elite people were being buried at Normanton Down, other major civilizations were rising across the Mediterranean. In Egypt, people were already writing history and stories in hieroglyphs. On Crete, the Minoans were using the undeciphered Linear A script. The Hittites ruled much of Turkey and wrote with cuneiform. The Mycenaeans took over Greece and later Crete, writing an early form of Greek in Linear B. We don't know how much the Stonehenge people knew about these civilizations, but one major event in the eastern Mediterranean might have affected them deeply. Around 1628 BCE, the volcano on the island of Santorini exploded. It was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in history, 4 times stronger than the Krakatoa eruption, and sent about 100 cubic kilometers of ash into the sky. We don't know exactly how this event affected the people of Stonehenge, but we have some clues. Tree ring expert Mike Bailey studied Irish oak trees and found signs of a big drop in growth in 1628 BCE, likely due to a cloud of volcanic ash. Greenland ice cores also show strong acid layers around 1644 BC, matching the tree ring data. In fact, 6 trees from 4 different bogs all showed their narrowest growth rings in 1624 BC. Events like this, extreme cold and failed crops, are extremely rare and have only happened 9 times in 6,000 years. This suggests that a major environmental collapse began around 1628 BC and lasted for several years. Even though we don't know much about the time after Stonehenge, we can compare it to a more recent disaster that we do understand well: the Year Without a Summer in 1816. This event happened because of the massive eruption of the Tambora volcano in Indonesia in 1815. After the Napoleonic Wars, Europe was already weak, and this climate disaster led to food shortages. There were food riots in Britain and France, and people looted grain stores. The worst chaos happened in inland countries like Switzerland, which even declared a national emergency. Across Europe, there were terrible storms, floods, and even freezing temperatures in August. People reported brown snow in Hungary and red snow in Italy. If the people who lived near Stonehenge experienced a disaster like this, such as the Santorini volcanic eruption around 1628 BC, they may have seen it as a sign from the gods, especially since they paid close attention to the sky and sun. This could have caused major changes in how they lived. In fact, after 1600 BC, we do see important changes. For example, around 1450 BC, people began placing offerings in the Wilsford Shaft, a deep pit near Stonehenge. These offerings were similar to the luxury items found in the rich burials at Normanton Down. But the changes were not just religious. Barry Cunliffe, in his book Landscape with People, explains that by the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, people mostly stopped building monuments and began to focus more on owning and controlling land. They created large, organized field systems, separated by straight lines and ditches. One such example is Windy Dido, west of Hampshire. Aerial photos taken in the 1920s show that this area covered about 90 hectares. The fields were laid out in neat rectangles, running down from a ridge. Cunliffe believes that a large, planned system like this must have required strong social organization and leadership. Windy Dido isn't unique. Other similar field systems were found near hill forts like Danebury and Woolbury, and in places like Salisbury Plain and the Marlborough Downs. This shows that in a short time, communities took strict control over land like never before. Cunliffe says these changes were part of a planned transformation. As people made new fields, they often left older burial mounds outside the fields, in grazing areas. We don't know exactly why, but the need for better farming may have played a role. People may have also paid more attention to the gods of the land, which could explain the offerings at Wilsford Shaft. Now, social status may have been shown not only through rich burials, but also through land ownership. A large, well-managed field was a clear symbol of power. By the end of the 2nd millennium BC, Cunliffe says the Wessex landscape changed again. People began building huge linear ditches that divided land into massive blocks. These are called farm boundaries, or linears. These lines may have been used to manage livestock, but more importantly, they were symbols of a new social order. These straight white lines on the land made it clear that someone was in control. Many of these lines led to hilltops. A few hundred years later, these hilltops were surrounded by defenses and turned into hill forts. Examples include Sidbury, Clearbury, and Quarley. This shows that the symbolic meaning of the ditches became even more powerful over time. Some of the new ditches even cut directly across the older field systems, suggesting that the new system replaced and erased the old one on purpose. This second land reform happened around the 12th century BC and wasn't limited to the Wessex area. For example, in Dartmoor, the field systems and settlements built in the middle of the 2nd millennium were abandoned. Similar changes happened in northern Britain too. The common explanation is that the weather changed, rainfall increased, and bogs began to form in higher areas. But Cunliffe also points to a major volcanic eruption in Iceland around 1159 BC, the Hekla eruption. Tree ring expert Mike Bailey found evidence in Irish trees. A very thick ring in 1160, followed by 10 years of very thin rings. This means the trees hardly grew for a decade, showing a time of major environmental stress, just like the period after 1628 BC. This second phase of land change may show that people began to rely more on animal herding than farming. Maybe the farming systems built around 1500 BC failed after 500 years of use. The topsoil may have become poor, and with more people to feed, communities likely faced stress and fear. They may have believed the gods of the earth had abandoned them. Volcanic ash in the sky could have blocked sunlight, making things worse. In such conditions, it's easy to understand why people would suddenly reorganize their world and start fresh. Were the people who organized land in 1628 BC the same as those who did it again after 1159? B. C. We may never know for sure, but we do know that the Salisbury Plain and nearby areas went through similar transformations. The rectangle-shaped fields from around 1500 BC were later replaced by the farm boundaries of the linears. Around 1100 BC, a lot of changes were happening in southern Britain. One example is the ceremonial road called the Avenue at Stonehenge. During this time, it was extended by 2 more kilometers to reach the Avon River. At the same time, 2 Bronze Age burial mounds were built on a hill next to the river, on land that would later become Vespasian's camp, a hill fort around 500 BC. These changes show how a once religious landscape was starting to take on military and political meaning. The expansion of the avenue, the building of barrows by the river, and the changes in farming all suggest that the Wessex people were under pressure. This pressure may have come from climate problems, but outside influences also likely played a role. We don't know exactly how much people in southern England knew about events in the Mediterranean, but they did have long-distance trade routes reaching as far as Mycenae in Greece. Around this time, the Mediterranean was going through major crises. the Mycenaean civilization collapsed around 1100 BC. The Hittite Empire disappeared around 1160 BC. Troy was destroyed around 1190 BC. For 400 years afterward, writing disappeared across much of Europe. This major collapse is known as the Bronze Age collapse, and its causes are still unclear. But, like in Britain, climate change might have played a big role. Between 1250 and 750 BC, Earth went through a cooling period. The Hittites, near the end of their kingdom, suffered from severe droughts and had to import grain from other lands. The ancient Greek writer Herodotus wrote that the Greeks who returned from the Trojan War were struck by famine and disease, and many people and animals died. These events show that life in the Mediterranean became very hard. Making things worse were the mysterious groups called the Sea Peoples. The name Sea Peoples comes from ancient Egyptian records. Around 1210 BC, Pharaoh Meremptah said he fought people from foreign lands who were helping the Libyans. He listed tribes like the Shurdan, Sheklesh, and Akaiwasha. Later, around 1180 BC, Pharaoh Ramses III also listed enemies from the sea, such as the Peliset, Tertia, and Jeker. These groups were described as sailing from their islands to attack Egypt. Other sources say, Shurdan may have come from Sardinia, Sheklesh may have come from Sicily, Akaiwasha and Danuna were probably Greeks. Philistines came from the Aegean and later settled in Canaan. Tertia may have been the Tyrrhenians, ancestors of the Etruscans in Italy. Chequer and Weshesh are harder to identify. These migrations were likely caused by climate change and famine, and they led people to move across the Mediterranean looking for new land. It's not clear if any of these people reached Britain, but it's certain that Britain was facing similar problems, including climate stress, economic changes, and social shifts. At this time in southern England, people were building farm boundaries, straight ditches and lines to divide land. To understand what happened next, we look at Potterne, a village 1.5 kilometers south of Devizes in Wiltshire. Between 1982 and 1985, archaeologists found a huge prehistoric rubbish mound, or midden, just north of the village in a place called Blackberry Hill. Cunliffe says this style was new to Wessex, with no local history. Some forms may be local copies, but others, especially those with pierced designs, are more likely imports or influenced by the Urnfield culture from eastern France or western Germany. While we don't have clear proof of a large migration, there might have been small groups of people or cultural influence from the continent. Potterne is not the only place with a big rubbish mound. John Barrett and David McComish found signs of another midden near All Canning's Cross, just 500 meters east of the village. But the most famous midden besides Potterne is the one at East Chisenbury, located about 10 kilometers north of Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain. The East Chisenbury midden is a huge circular trash mound from ancient times. It is about 200 meters wide, covering an area between 3.4 and 5 hectares, and in some places it is 2 meters high. Around 216,000 cubic feet of material has been preserved. Excavations in 1992 showed that it was created quickly between 800 to 600 BCE, and it was full of ritual and cultural remains. Thousands of pottery pieces were found, and they seem to have been placed there on purpose. Archaeologist David McComish reported that many of the animal bones found there came from newborn or unborn sheep. There were also many cattle, pig, and deer bones. 2 pieces of human skulls were discovered. One of them had scratches and bite marks, and was placed in the mound together with pottery fragments and a small stone, probably on purpose. Fossilized human feces were also found. so why was this trash mound made? Some think it was just the result of big feasts, but archaeologist Barry Cunliffe offered another idea. He believed it was a symbol of community control over waste and animal remains. People saw this trash as a source of power and fertility and wanted to manage it together. In earlier Wessex cultures, there is evidence that household waste was used in burial rituals. But the sheer size and careful creation of these middens in the 8th and 7th centuries BC shows they were not ordinary dumps. They were a public display of fertility and social unity. Besides making middens, people in southern England also started digging up chalk-rich clay called marl to improve their soil. Many settlements from this time show signs of chalk pits. The ground in many hilly areas was too acidic, so chalk was added to help grow crops. Some of these chalk pits were also used later to bury the dead. Along with trash and chalk, people also left behind bronze tools that tell us more about their way of life. According to Cunliffe, between 1150 and 1000 BC, people in southern Britain began to make new bronze tools, using metal with high lead content. This group of tools is called the Wilburton Complex, named after a village in Cambridgeshire. It includes leaf-shaped swords, socketed spearheads, and socketed axes. The largest collection is the Isleham Hoard, buried around 1000 BC. It includes 6,500 pieces, such as Wilburton weapons, bronze bowls, and parts of horse gear. By the late 10th century BC, people in southern and eastern Britain were developing new bronze tool styles influenced by Western France. These are known as the Ewart Park complex, which includes the famous carp's tongue swords, triangular knives, socketed chisels, and tools with pins. Starting in the 10th century BC, hammered bronze shields and bowls also appear in Britain. These came from Central European influences. For example, bronze cauldrons from Colchester and Shipton were likely made in southern Britain under Central European influence. Shields appeared around 1000 to 900 BC, and by the 8th century BC, they were common across the British Isles. Some of these may have originated in Hungary and reached Britain through Denmark. Other exotic items also arrived in Britain during this time, especially from Central and Northern Europe. For example, parts of horse harnesses began to appear, showing that horse riding and better saddles were becoming more common. By the 7th century BC, a more stable farming system had developed in southern Britain. After a few centuries where settlements were rare, we now start to see long-lasting farms and villages. But after 700 BC, hill forts began to spread rapidly. These were fortified places on hills, found across southern Britain, from Kent and Sussex, through Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, and into Wales. According to Christiansen, between 600 to 400 BC, many hill forts appeared, especially around Danebury in Wessex. Some were only 10 kilometers apart, showing stronger military and social organization. Hill forts in southern Britain come in two main types. 1. Small fortified villages. 2. Large hilltop settlements. These forts usually began around 800 or 700 BC. Examples include Bredon in Powys and Crickley Hill in Gloucestershire. They were built on hilltops, slopes, or ridges for protection. Many had gateways with towers and signs of heavy occupation inside. At Crickley Hill, archaeologists found two phases of building. First, rectangular houses and four-post grain stores, raised off the ground. Later, people built round houses up to 15 meters wide. At Danebury, in Hampshire, dating to around 500 BC, most homes were round houses. There were fewer four-post buildings, but there were many underground grain storage pits. The total storage space was around 1,160 cubic meters, enough to feed about 1,000 people for a year. These settlements were usually larger than 16 hectares, They had strong natural defenses and sometimes more than one ring of earth walls. Examples include Bethampton, Balksbury, and Ogbury. These sites often had low population, so some researchers think they were used more for storing grain or animals than for daily living. Rituals of fertility and offerings. Rituals about fertility and harvest didn't disappear with the hill forts. Cunliffe found that grain storage pits were common at Danebury and other sites. At first, people thought these were just to hide food from raiders. But Cunliffe believes they were ritual places where people offered seeds to underground gods. After planting, people would leave offerings in the pits, such as animal parts or tools. These ceremonies may have lasted until harvest time and were likely tied to seasonal festivals. At Danebury, in one of the grain pits, archaeologists found a dog and a chopped-up horse that had been placed there as offerings. The horse's head and front leg were carefully placed near the edge of the pit. This kind of ritual is similar to old Irish ceremonies, like the one held for the king at Tara. In that event, a bull was killed. A druid would eat its meat and drink the broth, then wrap himself in the bull's skin to have visions. A similar scene can be seen on the Gundestrup cauldron, where 3 warriors are shown sacrificing bulls, and 3 dogs are tied underneath them. Scholar Anne Ross said that animal sacrifices were common in Celtic society. The meat was eaten at feasts, but the heads and hooves were saved for special rituals. So, were the people who built places like Danebury actually Celts? Probably not. Most experts believe the Celts arrived in Britain between 450 and 200 BC. Archaeological evidence supports this, especially in Yorkshire, where the Arras culture appeared. This culture had chariot burials, with the carts either laid flat or taken apart. Iron tires, special horse bits, and jewelry similar to items from France were found in these graves. Historian Barry Cunliffe believes this culture came from a migration from the east around the late 5th or early 4th century BC. These people may have traveled from Burgundy, passed through Paris, and crossed into Britain. Interestingly, both in France and East Yorkshire, there were Celtic groups called the Parisii. Starting in the 5th century BC, pottery styles in southeast Britain began to show continental influence, especially from northern France and the Low Countries. One major example is the Highstead Dollins Moor group, which featured painted and decorated pottery. These pots looked a lot like Latin pottery from the European mainland. This style was mostly found in the Thames Valley and eastern Britain, including places like Long Wittenham, Highstead, and Darmsden. In more southern places like Sussex, Hampshire, and Wiltshire, the influence was weaker. It's unclear how these pottery styles arrived in Britain. There may have been small waves of migration, or these styles might have spread through trade. Because of this, it seems likely that early hill forts were not built by Celts. Still, the arrival of Celtic elites or fear of Celtic invasions may have caused people to build or improve these fortresses later on. According to archaeologist Timothy Darville, many early forts were abandoned or rebuilt in the 4th century BC. The newer hill forts were usually about 10 hectares in size and had multiple defensive walls. Their walls were built to look strong and impressive, using the shape of the land to their advantage. At Danebury, around 400 BC, a second wall was built, and the eastern gate was protected by a watchtower. This tower overlooked the entrance, making it easy to defend with slingshots. Many clay sling bullets and stones were found. Inside the fort, there were round houses and storage pits. Roads were carefully built. All of this shows that Danebury was home to a centralized, well-organized community. Other big hill forts include Beacon Hill, St. Catherine's Hill, Maiden Castle, Cadbury Castle, Barbury Castle, Fosbury, Yarnbury, and Castle Ditches. By the late Iron Age, Cunliffe says Britain was divided into 3 cultural zones. 1. Core region, in the southeast, with strong ties to Europe. 2. Outer region, from Dorset to Lincolnshire, where tribes minted coins. 3rd distant region, in Scotland and Wales, where coins were not yet used. In the core region, 4 tribes were important: the Trinovantes, Catuvellauni, Atrebates, and Canti. These tribes had many things in common with tribes in Belgium, like how they made pottery, buried their dead, and organized their economy and politics. Earlier, people thought that Caesar's Belgae had migrated and settled here. But Cunliffe thinks that this culture came mostly from trade and social interaction, not from large-scale invasion. These 4 tribes are linked to the Aylesford Swarling culture, named after 2 cemetery sites in Kent, dated to around 50 BC. Among them, the Atrebates tribe stands out. They lived in areas like West Sussex, Hampshire, Berkshire, and their capital was Caliva Atrebatum. They also controlled Cunetio, near Forest Hill. In the outer region, 4 tribes were important: Durotriges, based in Dorset; Dobuni, in Gloucestershire and nearby areas; Iceni, in East Anglia; Corialtauvi, in the East Midlands. The Durotriges lived west of the Atrebates. Their border may have followed the Avon and Wylye rivers. The New Forest may have acted as a natural barrier. Their coins and pottery have been found as far west as Somerset. The Dobuni were based in Gloucestershire and extended into parts of Somerset, Wiltshire, Oxfordshire, and Worcestershire. We started this study looking for the Mound people, and we found many signs of them. From the Neolithic builders of West Kennet Long Barrow, Silbury Hill, and Stonehenge, to the people who made trash mounds in the Bronze and Iron Ages, and those who built hill forts, their traces are everywhere. We also found early signs of horse goddesses like Epona, Rhiannon from the Mabinogion, and Cunamaglus, the hound lord of Nettleton Shrub. Outside influences in Britain's early history were also very clear: the Beaker people from the continent, the Amesbury Archer from the Alps, the Aras culture from Celtic Gaul, Latin pottery, and the Belgic tribes from northern Gaul all left their mark. Starting around 2300 BC, powerful families controlled Wiltshire and East Hampshire, first through monuments like Stonehenge, then through land ownership, and later through fertility control and hill forts. But what happened to the people who built and cared for Stonehenge, who later controlled the hill forts and the land? Did they become the Durotriges tribe? Cunliffe thinks not, since the Durotriges seemed isolated and poor, with weak trade and no clear elite class. Did they join or get conquered by the Atrebates, who lived near the north and east of Salisbury Plain? Or maybe they mixed with Belgic immigrants, who later settled around St. Catherine's Hill and Orham's Arbor, the area that would become Venta Belgarum. Maybe they stayed near Vespasian's camp and continued their traditions. Historian Dennis Price believes the Greek explorer Pytheas of Massalia, who visited northwest Europe in the 4th century BCE, may have visited Stonehenge. His writings are lost, but later authors like Diodorus Siculus quoted him. According to Diodorus, there was a huge round temple dedicated to Apollo in Britain, and the people there were musicians who sang songs of praise. The temple's leaders were called Boreadae and were believed to be descendants of the god. Price suggests this temple was Stonehenge, and the nearby settlement was Vespasian's camp. Finally, we are left with a mystery. Who were the people who brought all Canning's cross pottery from France or Germany, who built the early mounds and forts in Wiltshire? In the next part, we will try to answer that question, and also learn more about the identity of the Mound people, the Children of Dawn, and the mysterious Druids mentioned in poems like The Spoils of Annwn, and the Mabinogion,